Chapter 832. Dragon Scripture? This name sounds familiar. After thinking for a while, I remembered that according to historical records, the Qing Emperor Kangxi, with the encouragement of his grandmother, the Borjigit clan, had issued an edict to copy the Tibetan Buddhist scripture of the Ming dynasty, Ganjur, in Tibetan language. It prayed for Buddha's grace to be spread far and wide, for the country to be prosperous and the people to live in peace. It was said that the Dragon Scripture contained 1,100 Tibetan Buddhist scriptures, which are divided into 108 volumes. They symbolized the 108 kinds of troubles that could be cured. For Buddhists, the power of the scripture was amazing. It was said that those who were fated to read the entire set of scriptures would be blessed with 7 lives of peace. Although I had heard of this scripture, I had never heard that it could help a scale worm to transform into a real dragon. Even if this scripture could help a person transform into a real dragon, where could I find a scale worm? As soon as this question popped up in my mind, I understood it immediately. Apparently, Ajia Hotagdu wanted me to give this scripture to the serpent spirit so that he could transform into a real dragon after comprehending it. After thinking it through, I felt a chill in my heart. I stood up, stared at Ajia Hotagdu, and asked coldly, "Who are you? Why do you know so much about me?" Seeing my reaction, he was stunned for a moment. Then he put his palms together and said, "Almsgiver Zhou, please don't be angry. Since I have something to ask of you, I'll be well prepared." Although Ajia Hotagtu's words were unpleasant to the ears, they were reasonable. Since it was just a business deal, I didn't have to be so serious. After we get what we need, we don't have to meet again. After staying silent for a while, I calmed down and sat down again. After thinking for a while, I asked, "Master, can I have a look at the Dragon Scripture first?" I wanted to verify whether what he said was true or not. Although I had only read a few scriptures, I might not be able to recognize the Dragon Scripture. However, since he said that this scripture contained great power, I might as well have a look at it. After hearing what I said, Ajia Hotagdu seemed to understand. He told me that the Dragon Scripture was an important treasure of the Tao Temple. Only the temple master knew where it was kept. He signaled us to wait here for a while and said that he would come back soon. I nodded, claiming it was natural. After he left, only the fatty and I were left in the room. Seeing that I hadn't spoken for a long time, he felt a little annoyed. He came to me and asked, "Third baby, do you think we should believe this old monk?" Whether I believed it or not, it was still a shortcut to finding the true dragon bone. For the sake of Wuyue and Lao AI, I had to give it a try no matter what. Seeing that I had made up my mind, the fatty didn't say anything else. Half an hour later, Ajia Hotagdu finally returned with a wooden box in his hand. When he arrived in front of us, he thanked us for waiting. Then he opened the wooden box and handed it to me. Inside the wooden box, there was only a silk scroll and nothing else. I was a little confused. Is this the Dragon Scripture that Aga Hotagdu mentioned? I didn't reach out to receive it, but looked at Ajia Hotagdu and asked, "Master, are you trying to trick me? Although I don't know many scriptures, I know what the Dragon Scripture looks like. How can it be as simple as a silk scroll?" After hearing my words, Aga Hotagdu didn't seem surprised at all. Instead, he smiled and said, "Benefactor Zhou, you don't know. The Dragon Scripture that you know is no different from an ordinary scripture, but the one in my hand has great power." After saying that, he gently placed the wooden box on the table and took out the silk scroll. He slowly opened it and signaled me to have a look. When he opened the silk scroll, I felt a wave of energy. However, the wave was very weak. If I didn't carefully examine it, I wouldn't be able to detect it. Because of this, I somewhat believed what he said. However, when I looked at the silk scroll, I didn't see any words on it. There was not a single word on the cloth, but the flowing light on it was very eye-catching. This scene reminded me of the time when I was in the underground palace under the Langya platform. There was also a wordless silk scroll under the imperial seal. At that time, I pressed the imperial seal on the seal and poured the true dragon chi into it. Only then did the words on the silk scroll appear. This silk scroll didn't have a seal on it, but it could be opened in the same way. Thinking of this, I moved the Taoist chi in my body to my palm and pressed it on the silk scroll. Instantly, A strong, attractive force came from my palm. I didn't panic, but quickly moved the Taoist chi in my body and gathered it in my palm. After a while, more than half of the Taoist chi in my body had been consumed. The attractive force also weakened a lot. It seemed that it was about to be full. After 3 to 5 seconds, the attractive force finally disappeared. In the blink of an eye, the silk scroll shone brightly and brightly, illuminating the whole meditation room. The golden light was so dazzling that I didn't dare to look at it directly. After I relaxed a little, I turned my head to look at it. There were some small golden words floating on the silk scroll. They were written in Sanskrit, which I didn't know. While I was looking at it, the golden light suddenly disappeared, and the silk scroll returned to its original appearance. I didn't expect that all this had happened in just a few seconds, and I hadn't read the scripture in detail. Even so, I was sure that Aya Hotagda didn't lie to me. This scripture was indeed a precious treasure. At this moment, Aya Hotagda said, "If Benefactor Zhou is willing to help me, I'll give this dragon scripture to you." After saying that, he put the silk scroll back into the wooden box and handed it to me. Of course, I was happy. However, Aya Hotagda had mentioned that this dragon scripture was a precious treasure of the Tao Temple. If I took it, I would be taking advantage of him. Thinking of this, I opened my mouth and said, "This dragon scripture is truly too precious. I really don't deserve it." That Aya Hotagda seemed to understand what I was implying and tried to persuade me. "Benefactor Zhou, you might not know this, but if you comprehend the entirety of the dragon scripture, its power will disappear, and the scripture will become nothing more than a piece of cloth. In that case, it didn't make much difference whether I gave this scripture or not." With this thought in mind, I stretched out my hand to receive the silk book and express my thanks. Seeing me like this, Aya Hotagda didn't hesitate. He immediately asked me when I could help him open the clear heaven pagoda. Seeing him so anxious, I was curious. Previously, I heard him mention that when an eminent Buddhist monk passed away, he had ascended into the clear heaven pagoda to turn it into a Buddhist sarira. Could it be that a monk in the Tower Temple was about to reach the end of his lifespan? With this in mind, I asked Aya Hotagda about the situation. Unexpectedly, after hearing my words, he sighed and replied, "To tell you the truth, I've been hearing Lord Buddha's voice in the past few days. I think he won't be able to stay in the secular world for long. I'm lucky to have Benefactor Zhou's help, and I'll be able to fulfill my wish." After saying that, he stopped talking and stared at me with his bright eyes. Seeing him like this, I really respected him. It seemed that everyone had to die since ancient times. Since he was trying to persuade me, I didn't say anything else, so I signaled that we could start at any time. But before that, I still needed to make some preparations. Aya Hotagda stood up, put his palms together, and bowed to me. "I'll have to trouble Benefactor Zhou for everything." I didn't say anything more and told him what he needed to do first. After that, Aya Hotagda excused himself and left, saying that it was urgent and that he needed to make preparations immediately. After he left, we didn't stay in the meditation room for long, so we went back to the courtyard where we were staying. After returning to the room, I summoned the serpent spirit. As soon as he appeared, he had a listless look on his face. He kept complaining that I had disturbed his sweet dream. I didn't waste time talking to him, so I directly told him that there was a good method that could help him transform into a real dragon. As soon as I said that, the serpent spirit's body shook. He didn't look sleepy at all, so he quickly asked me what it was. Seeing that he was so anxious, I took out the wooden box that contained the dragon scripture and placed it in front of him. "There's a scripture inside. If you can completely comprehend it, you'll be able to transform into a real dragon." Unexpectedly, as soon as the serpent spirit heard that there was a scripture in the box, he repeatedly shook his head and retreated. He thought that the bald donkey scripture was too hard to understand. Just by looking at it, he would rather die than comprehend it, let alone comprehend it. I had already expected that he would behave like that. He had a stubborn character, so he was susceptible to coercion but not persuasion. I didn't want to waste time talking to him, so I directly summoned Tong Tong. As soon as the serpent spirit saw Tong Tong, he seemed to know what I was going to do. He hugged my arm and begged for mercy. If it was an ordinary matter, I wouldn't have made things difficult for him. However, the current situation wasn't ordinary, and he was the only one who could accomplish it. Whether he could obtain the real dragon bone or not, it was directly related to Wu Yue's life and death. I definitely wouldn't let the serpent spirit do as he wished. Thinking to this point, I told him the whole story and emphasized that this matter was extremely beneficial to me, him, and Lu Ruxu and her husband. After hearing what I said, the serpent spirit's attitude became much calmer. He sat at the side with his head lowered. He seemed to be weighing the pros and cons. Fortunately, he wasn't unreasonable. After a while, he nodded and said that he could give it a try. His words and actions showed that he was slightly hesitant. It was possible that he was hindered by my threats and promises that made him reluctantly agree to it. However, with his current state, if I asked him to calm down and comprehend the Buddhist scripture, the effect would be minimal. Thinking of this, I comforted the serpent spirit. This matter isn't urgent. You should think about it first. After saying that, I left the serpent spirit in the room and told him the method to open the dragon scripture. After that, I brought everyone out of the room. I planned to see how Aya Hotagtu was preparing. Unexpectedly, as soon as I left the courtyard, I heard a dragon roar coming from behind. The roar was very familiar. It was the roar of the serpent spirit after he transformed into his original form. However, after the dragon roar, the serpent spirit's aura suddenly disappeared. Chapter 833. Looking at the situation in front of me, I subconsciously thought that something had happened to the serpent spirit while he was studying the dragon scripture, so he left this place in a hurry. Could it be that he had already learned something from the dragon scripture and left this place to go to Kunlun Mountain? Ajia Hotakta said that he could successfully transform into a dragon after studying the dragon scripture, but it was too fast. I thought for a while and rejected this possibility. It wasn't because I knew the dragon scripture well, but because I wasn't far from here. If the serpent spirit had left, I could have sensed it. After all, the serpent spirit only had the cultivation base of the seal. Even if he had successfully transformed into a real dragon was just a young spirit. It was impossible that I couldn't sense him. However, the serpent spirit didn't leave. Where did he go? As I thought about it, I quickly walked forward and picked up the dragon scripture cloth from the ground. When I looked down, I discovered that the suction force from before had completely disappeared. I tried to send my Dao Qi into the cloth, but the cloth even resisted me. Something was wrong. I frowned and tried to continue studying it. Tong Tong, who hadn't returned to the jade bracelet, hugged my arm and whispered, "Brother, did the small serpent get into the cloth?" Her words sounded whimsical, but they reminded me of something. Now that the cloth had suddenly changed and the serpent spirit had disappeared, it was possible that the serpent spirit had gotten into the cloth as Tong Tong had said. However, if I want to confirm this, I had to ask Ajia Hotagda. Thinking about this, I put the cloth back into the wooden box and signaled Tong Tong to return to the jade bracelet. After all, this was an important place of Buddhism, and I was afraid that some exorcism methods might hurt her. After Tong Tong left, I took the fatty out of the room and prepared to go to Ajia Hotagtu's meditation room. However, as soon as we walked out of the courtyard, we saw many monks standing outside the door and looking into the room. Judging from their looks, they had probably heard the dragon roar. I didn't pay attention to him and was about to leave with the fatty. At this moment, the Lama who had welcomed us earlier came from afar. When he saw me, he hurried to greet me. Did something happen to the dragon scripture? After I nodded to confirm, the Lama smiled and told me. After the dragon roar, Master guessed that Benefactor Zhou had some doubts. He specially asked me to come here to inform Benefactor Zhou to wait for the good news. His words confirmed my speculation. Since Aya and Hotagda said so, the spirit serpent's behavior should be normal. I calmed down and asked the Lama, "Is his master ready?" He nodded. "Naturally, everything has been prepared. If almsgiver Zhou has nothing else to do, please follow this poor monk to see if there are any shortcomings on Master's side." Since there was no problem with the spirit snake, I didn't have any reason to reject him. I nodded and followed him. Soon, We arrived at a spacious place. From afar, I could see Aya Hotagtu's busy figure. However, it seemed that he was the only one here. After all, he was old, so it was difficult for him to move. The Lama next to me seemed to have noticed my gaze. He explained, "Master told us not to let too many people know about this. Therefore, this place was set up by both Master and me." Aya Hotagtu was very cautious. I didn't say anything and just walked towards him. Seeing us approaching, Aya Hotagtu stopped what he was doing. He put his palms together and uttered the name of Buddha. I didn't stand on ceremony with him. I asked him directly if he was ready. Aya Hotagtu nodded. "I've set up a Buddhist formation here. I think it should be able to block the aura of the Haoyan Pagoda." The Buddhist formation that he mentioned should be a Buddhist formation. I had never heard of it before, so I didn't know its power. After thinking for a while, I asked the fatty to set up another formation to block the aura of the Haoyan Pagoda. It wasn't that I didn't trust Aya Hotagtu, but the wild aura of the Haoyan Pagoda was not to be underestimated. If the aura of the Haoyan Pagoda was leaked, it might attract the attention of other temples. When the time comes, there will be people who will fight over it. Snatching the Clear Sky Pagoda is a small matter, but the Tower Temple will also be met with an unprovoked disaster. Furthermore, the matter of me obtaining the Dragon Bone will definitely be delayed, so it's better to be careful. Aya Hotagtu understood that it was better to be prepared. He stood aside, silently, and waited for the fatty to set up the formation together with me. Soon, the formation was set up, and a light yellow barrier rose around us. I had seen this formation many times, so I didn't find it strange. However, it was the first time for Aya Hotagtu to see it. After staring at it for a while, he looked at the fatty thoughtfully and asked him about his master's background. The fatty's master was very famous, so I didn't hide it from him. I told him the name of the divination sect and immortal one. It seemed that Aya Hotagtu had heard of them before. After hearing my words, he was quite surprised. He walked over to the fatty and talked to him. He kept praising the fatty for being from a famous sect and being taught by a great master. Usually, when a fatty heard such praises, he would be very proud. However, since the trip to the Medicine King Valley, the fatty had been in a bad mood. Therefore, he didn't show much of an expression after hearing what the fatty said. After saying a few polite words, he stopped talking. After they finished talking, Aya Hotagtu walked back. He took out the Haoyan Pagoda and put it on the ground in front of me. Then he stepped aside. I didn't forget the method to activate the Haoyan Pagoda. However, when I activated the Haoyan Pagoda, it was a huge object that was dozens of meters high. Now it had become so small. I wondered if the Haoyan Pagoda would still work. While thinking about this, I started to walk around the Haoyan Pagoda. Soon I completed the whole set of Haoyan Pagoda. It turned out that my worries were not groundless. After I completed the whole set of Haoyan Pagoda, the small Haoyan Pagoda didn't move at all. Aya Hotagtu realized that something was wrong. He walked forward and asked me what was going on. After thinking for a while, I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I tried to walk the Haoyan Pagoda again. This time, I didn't finish all the steps in one breath. Instead, I carefully checked the situation on the Haoyan Pagoda while I was walking. After I finished walking, I felt that the Haoyan Pagoda was still useful for activating the Haoyan Pagoda. However, I didn't know why, but there was a power on the Haoyan Pagoda that blocked the Haoyan Pagoda's power from entering it. After I had figured it out, I told Aya Hotagtu all about it, together with my conjecture. Activating the Haoyan Pagoda was my deal with him. Now that the dragon scripture had been used by the snake spirit, I couldn't activate the Haoyan Pagoda. That was why I told him about it after I found out what was wrong with the Haoyan Pagoda. After listening to me, Aya Hotagtu became silent. After a while, he didn't give up. He told me that there was a record of the Haoyan Pagoda in the Tower Temple. If it didn't work, he could go to the temple and read the ancient books. Perhaps he could find a solution. He wanted to try his best to save the situation, but I didn't have much hope. According to Nangong, the reason why the ancient god equipment had reappeared in the world was because it had an important mission. The rise of Buddhism was less than 2,000 years ago. How much information could there be in the Tower Temple? Even so, It wasn't a good time to be discouraging. So I nodded and asked him to go to the temple to check the ancient books. Seeing me like that, Hotagta didn't say anything and went back to the temple with the Lama. After they left, I picked up the Hautian pagoda and looked at it carefully. It was the first time that I had observed the Hautian pagoda like this. However, I didn't find anything special about it, except for its strange appearance. Previously, I was able to activate the Hautian pagoda by accident because I had connected it with the Taihao Bawa 9 palaces. Now, if I wanted to restore it to its original appearance, would I have to use the same method? After thinking about it, I felt that it was worth a try. However, the Fushibagwa was really exquisite. Although I had dabbled in it, I wasn't proficient in it. If I hadn't been lucky, it would have taken me a long time. Thinking about this, I suddenly realized that the fatty was a person who believed in experience. The Bagua 9 Palaces was an entry-level law, and it was a classic that he had to study for his entire life. If I handed this matter to him, he might be able to find something. With this thought in mind, I quickly handed the Hautian pagoda to the fatty and asked him to check if he could restore it to its original appearance using what he had learned. After hearing my words, he understood what I meant by what he had learned. Perhaps he also knew that since I had no clue about this matter, the heavy responsibility would fall on his shoulders. So, he didn't shirk his responsibility and asked me to look at it carefully before coming to a conclusion. Seeing that the fatty was so serious, I didn't disturb him. Instead, I squatted on the ground and carefully observed his movements. 2 hours later, Ajia Hotagtu and his disciple returned in a hurry. However, both of them looked dejected. It seemed that they didn't find any useful information. I had already expected this, so I wasn't too disappointed to see them like this. When they came closer, they found that the fatty was holding the Hautian pagoda and was examining it carefully. Ajia Hotagtu slowly walked in front of me and said in a low voice, "I've neglected this matter. I didn't study it clearly in advance. I've put benefactor Zhou in a difficult position." His voice was low, and it sounded like he had given up. After saying that, he sighed and said helplessly, "The Hautian pagoda can't be opened. I really don't know if I can condense a Buddhist relic. It seems that the fate of our tower temple hasn't arrived yet. I won't force it anymore." Originally, I wanted to comfort him. However, after hearing his words, I suddenly thought that the Hautian pagoda was an ancient divine artifact. It definitely didn't have much connection with Buddhism. But why could it condense a Buddhist relic? Also, the power of my footwork was stopped by a force. Combined with what I had thought before, could this force also be related to Buddhism? Thinking of this, an idea flashed in my mind. I quickly asked the fatty to stop and told Ajia Hotagtu to try to use Buddhism to resonate with the Hautian pagoda. After hearing my words, he was startled. He didn't know what I meant. It was just my conjecture. I couldn't tell him the details at the moment, so I continued to urge him. Although he was a little skeptical, he still nodded after hearing my firm tone. He held the Hautian pagoda upright and closed his eyes. Chapter 834. Ajia Hotagtu slowly spat out golden swastikas, which floated towards the Hautian pagoda. In the blink of an eye, those swastikas went into the Hautian pagoda and disappeared. Seeing this, I had some confidence in my heart. However, there was no response from the Hautian pagoda. Perhaps he was not strong enough to activate the Hautian pagoda. Thinking of this, I asked the Lama to come and help his master. The Lama was stunned when he heard me calling him, but he soon reacted and shook his head. Donor Zhou, although I'm at the middle stage of the young god celestial master, I'm still much weaker than my master. Moreover, my dharma is not as good as my master's, so even if I help him, I won't be able to do much. Listening to what he said, it seemed that Ajia Hotagtu not only had a profound dharma, but his cultivation was also at the late stage or the peak of the young god celestial master. According to what the Lama said, we can only rely on Ajia Hotagtu now. Thinking of this, I stood aside and hoped that the Hautian pagoda would change as soon as possible. Ajia Hotagtu seemed to have heard our words. In the blink of an eye, his aura became stronger, and he spat out countless swastikas, which all went into the Haotian pagoda. After a while, the Haotian pagoda buzzed and began to shake violently. Seeing this, everyone was delighted, but they didn't dare to make a sound. At such a critical moment, they were afraid that they would disturb Agia Hotagtu. Thinking of this, I stood still and held my breath, watching the Haotian pagoda. After a while, the Haotian pagoda suddenly became quiet, but the golden swastikas were still going into the pagoda. Seeing this, I suddenly had a thought. Is the Haotian pagoda going to return to its original form? While I was thinking, a strong wild aura burst out of the Haotian pagoda, and then it flew into the air. This seemed to confirm my guess, so I hurriedly asked everyone to step back. The fat man and the llama didn't dare to hesitate, and they stepped back dozens of meters. However, Agia Hotagtu was still sitting on the ground and didn't stop. Although I knew that the Haotian pagoda was going to recover, I wasn't sure whether it would affect the Haotian pagoda if I interrupted him. However, if it did not bring him away, it would be hard to avoid injuring him by relying on the vast heaven pagoda's enormous body. After much consideration, I decided to stay by his side just in case. Just thinking up to here, that vast heaven pagoda no longer absorbed those golden swastikas. I hurriedly woke Aya Hotagtu up and asked him to step back. He didn't dare to be negligent. He followed behind me and flew to where the fatty was. At the same time, a loud noise came from behind him, and the ground shook violently. Then dust scattered in all directions like stray bullets, smashing the ground full of holes. However, when we turned around, we discovered that the place where we were previously standing had already sunk close to 100 meters, and that clear sky pagoda only revealed the top of the pagoda. All of this was within my expectations, so I wasn't surprised to see such a scene. But it was the first time the few people beside him saw the true appearance of the clear heaven pagoda. This scene really made them somewhat speechless. However, they weren't inexperienced people, and they instantly returned to normal. At this time, Aya Hotagtu walked to my side and said softly, "Benefactor Zhou, let's not waste any more time. Let's start." He spoke in a hurry. When I turned around, I found that his face was as pale as a piece of paper, and he looked very haggard, as if he had aged 10 years. Looking at his appearance, he might have consumed a lot of his cultivation just now. He didn't have much time left, and now it seemed that he wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Thinking up to here, I hurriedly nodded and signaled him to follow closely behind me. After listening to my words, he put his palms together and bowed to me. "Benefactor Zhou is very kind. If this old monk is lucky enough to reach the Western Paradise, he will definitely pray for you." After saying that, he begged me to enter the clear sky pagoda with him. I was a little suspicious, as I didn't know what he meant by that. Seeing me like that, he explained, "This old monk is going to leave behind a relic after I pass away. However, this old monk doesn't know anything about the clear sky pagoda, so I will have to trouble Benefactor Zhou to protect this old monk. When the time comes, I will have to trouble Benefactor Zhou to bring out the relic and give it to this bad disciple." His request was reasonable, so I didn't hesitate to agree to it. After hearing my promise, Aya Hotagtu slightly nodded and bowed to me again. Then he called his disciple and told him that he would be in charge of all the chores in the temple, and that he must carefully train the next living Buddha. After hearing this, the Lama knelt on the ground and muttered, "I will obey the master's order." I saw the scene with my own eyes. There are many parting in the world, and I have experienced many of them. Seeing this scene, I didn't feel much emotion in my heart. On the contrary, the fatty's eyes were a little moist. I could understand why the fatty was like this. I don't have a master, and all these years, I have almost relied on myself to reach my current cultivation level. However, the fatty was different from me. He had been with enlightened Master Guan for 10 years. The relationship between a master and his disciple was like that of a father and son. The scene of a master and disciple parting with each other in life and death had indeed touched him. Not only him, but I also noticed that the Lama's eyes were a little red. This monk, who was nearly 50 years old, still couldn't suppress his emotions. He said that all the eminent monks in the world had seen through the mortal world and only had the supreme Dharma in their hearts. However, they lived in a mortal world, so how could they completely cut off their 7 emotions and 6 desires? On the other hand, Aya Hotagdo looked relaxed. He touched the Lama's head, helped him up, and said slowly, "Disciple, I'm going to serve the Lord Buddha now. I'll leave the Tar Temple to you." After saying that, he didn't look at the Lama anymore, but signaled me to start. The Lama knew that this matter was very important, so he didn't say anything else. He retreated to the fatty's side, sat down, and began to recite Buddhist scriptures. I didn't delay any longer. I stepped forward, and when the last step landed on the ground, a suction force came from the Haoyan Pagoda. At this moment, I signaled Aya Hotagta not to resist. After saying that, he slightly nodded and said the name of Buddha. In the blink of an eye, the 2 of us were pulled into the Haoyan Pagoda by the suction force. As soon as I stood still, I found that the inside of the Haoyan Pagoda was different from before. There were countless golden swastikas floating in the pagoda, which made the Haoyan Pagoda look golden and full of Buddhist aura. Seeing this, it wasn't difficult to understand that the Buddhist scriptures that Aya Hotagda had recited were all here. However, all of this was beyond my expectation, and I couldn't figure out the reason for it at the moment. Not only me, but Aya Hotagda was also shocked by this scene. After a long time, he murmured, "It seems that all of this is my good fortune. I'm a little scared." After saying that, he didn't have time to look around, so he directly sat down and closed his eyes. From his behavior, I guessed that he was waiting for the end of his life. Therefore, I didn't disturb him, but wandered around in the pagoda. Previously, when I was in the Jade Buddha Temple, I was eager to study the method of the astral step, so I didn't have time to study the internal structure of the Haoyan Pagoda. Now that I have nothing to do, I can take this opportunity to learn more about it. When the fire attribute Tai Sui was here, I didn't notice that there was a big space inside the Haoyan Pagoda. Unexpectedly, it took me an hour to wander around the pagoda. Except for the golden swastikas that filled the sky, there was nothing special about the Haoyan Pagoda. After wandering around the pagoda, I felt a little bored, so I returned to Aya Hotagtu and sat down to meditate. I didn't know how long I'd been sitting there, but there was no movement in the surroundings. When I was about to stand up, I heard Aya Hotagta calling me in a low voice, "Donor Zhou, thank you." After saying that, the fluctuation of his aura suddenly disappeared. I was startled, so I opened my eyes to take a look. His head was lowered, but his hands were still clasped together. Seeing this, I knew that Aya Hotagta had gone to the west. Therefore, I stood up, bowed, and said, "Good luck." As soon as I finished speaking, a gust of wind suddenly blew around me. The golden swastikas in the pagoda gathered above Aya Hotagtu's head along with the gust of wind. In just a few seconds, the golden swastikas crumbled into a ball that emitted golden light. After the last golden swastikas were fused, the gust of wind in the pagoda stopped. This was the first time that I had seen such a scene. I had heard about the relics left behind by the Buddhist monks when they passed away. Now that I saw this scene, I was quite curious. However, I knew that this was very important to Aya Hotagtu in the Tao Temple, so I didn't dare to disturb him, so I quickly stepped back. When I stood still again, the ball that contained the golden energy fell and hit Aya Hotagta's body. However, the golden ball didn't seem to hurt his body, but wrapped it up. After a while, the light on the ball weakened a little, but it was not obvious. After seeing this, I thought to myself, this can't be done in one go. It should take a long time. With that thought in mind, I didn't panic. After all, this matter was not under my control, so I just had to wait. After waiting for a few hours, when the last golden light disappeared, the aura of the energy became very weak. After that, I found that the dead body had disappeared, and it was replaced by an oval object that was emitting a light yellow light. This object was the relic that Aya Hotagtu had been longing for. I had seen it when I was fighting with the Dragon Village, so it was easy for me to recognize it. Chapter 835. When I came out of the clear sky pagoda, it was sunrise outside. Ajia Hotagta's disciple was still squatting at the same spot, waiting for me. The fat man beside him was sleeping soundly. It seemed that I had been in the pagoda for several days. When the Lama saw me, he was startled. He quickly stood up with an indescribable excitement on his face. He hurriedly walked to me and bowed to me. Then, he said in a low voice, "Benefactor Zhou, thank you for your hard work." Ajia Hotagta didn't hide anything from this Lama. Previously, he had said that he would take care of his affairs. So, when I saw the anticipation in his eyes, I took out the relic of Ajia Hotagta after he passed away and gave it to him. After receiving the relic, the Lama's eyes were filled with sadness. He bowed again and thanked me. I waved my hand and ignored him. Then, I went to the fat man's side and woke him up. When the fat man opened his eyes and saw me, he immediately became spirited. He jumped up from the ground and asked me with concern, "How did it go?" His reaction warmed my heart. So, I told him what had happened in the pagoda. After I finished talking about what had happened in the pagoda, I prepared to bring the fat man back to the meditation room to check on the spirit snake. At this moment, the Lama behind me stopped me. "Benefactor Zhou, you have given our tower temple a new lease of life. I really don't know how to express my gratitude. There's one more thing. I wonder if Benefactor Zhou can help us again." When I heard his words, I couldn't help but frown. This time, I had made a deal with Ajia Hotag. Why is this Lama so insensible? Why does he need my help? The Lama saw the impatience in my eyes, so he didn't wait for me to reply. He turned around and pointed at the clear sky pagoda and continued. "This pagoda is an ancient divine instrument. It fell into the tower temple out of nowhere. It can be considered to be fated with the tower temple. However, it's a pity that no one in the tower temple knows how to control it. Leaving the clear sky pagoda in the tower temple is a blasphemy against the divine instrument's name." I immediately understood. Could it be that this guy wants to get the method to control the clear sky pagoda from me? After pondering for a while, I felt relieved. The clear heaven pagoda isn't mine. I know the incantation to activate it, so there's no point in hiding it. I might as well do a favor at little cost and leave the incantation to Tower Temple, so as to form good karma. After making up my mind, I opened my mouth and said to the Lama, "I also don't know the method to control the clear sky pagoda. All I know is the method to open it. Since this pagoda is here, I will teach you the method to activate the astral steps." After listening to me, the Lama repeatedly waved his hand and said, "Benefactor Zhou, you misunderstand. How could the Tao Temple dare to covet such a divine item? What this poor monk means is that it is not appropriate to leave this pagoda in the temple. Benefactor Zhou has a way to control it. There is no harm in taking this pagoda away." His words gave me a shock, and I immediately reacted. Just now, I was a bit of a petty person gauging the heart of gentlemen. This Lama was actually so generous, directly gifting the clear sky pagoda. After keeping silent for a while, I finally reacted. This Lama was really smart. The clear sky pagoda was a divine item, and the people of the Tao Temple didn't know how to control it, so it was useless to keep it. On the contrary, it would attract the greed of others and bring a lot of trouble. Now that Hotedu had passed away, the strength of the Tao Temple was severely weakened, and they couldn't keep this pagoda anymore, so it was better to do a favor at little cost and give this pagoda to me. The clear sky pagoda was one of the 10 great divine tools, so naturally I was a bit greedy. However, after thinking about it carefully, I still shook my head and refused. Firstly, I already had the Xianyuan sword. With my current cultivation, I couldn't even display half of the Xianyuan sword's power. Even if I got the clear sky pagoda, it wouldn't be of much use to me. Secondly, although the clear sky pagoda could transform into an exquisite small pagoda, I didn't know how to control it. Now that the clear sky pagoda was several dozen zhang tall, I really couldn't take it away. After making a decision, I told the Lama that if the Tao Temple didn't want to keep this pagoda, they could just remove the surrounding barrier and wait for the fated person. Nangong had said that the 10 great divine tools were closely related to the opening of the gate of the mountain and sea realm. From this, I speculated that the clear sky pagoda would eventually appear in front of the gate of the mountain and sea realm. As for who would obtain it in the end, I didn't know. After hearing what I said, the Lama knew that I had made up my mind, so he didn't disturb me any further. He retreated to the side, and I left with the fatty. After returning to the meditation room, I asked the fatty to pack some things as we planned to go to the Kunlun Mountains. The fatty didn't delay. While packing, he asked me why we were in such a hurry. I told him that the snake spirit had been in the Buddhist scriptures for some time. Based on what happened when the snake spirit transformed into a flood dragon, when the snake spirit came out, it would most likely be in an uncontrollable state. To prevent any accidents, we had to go to the Kunlun Mountains in advance. Soon, we finished packing and went to the Great Golden Tile Hall to bid farewell to the monks of the Tile Temple. Although the relic was a business transaction, I had a good impression of Aya Hotagtu, and the monks of the Tile Temple treated me with respect. However, just as the temple master had said, the relic was related to the internal strife of the Tibetan Buddhism sect. As I had important matters to attend to, I didn't want to get involved in it. It was better to leave as soon as possible. When we arrived, the Lama who had taken over the position of Aya Hotagtu Temple's master was discussing some matters with the other monks. After asking why we had come, the Lama tried to persuade us to stay. After seeing that we had made up our minds, he nodded and turned around to talk to the other monks in the hall. Then, he escorted us out of the temple. After we got into the car, he bowed and said goodbye. After leaving the Tao Temple, my mind was completely focused on the matter of the snake spirit transforming into a flood dragon. We followed the path we had taken to get to the Kunlun Mountains. This area was very cold. Half of the year, it was always winter. However, the weather was sunny these days. Although the accumulated snow hadn't melted yet, the resistance was much smaller. Soon, we returned to the place where we had met the monks of the Tao Temple. This place was the Kunlun Mountains entrance, and there was no way to go further. After leaving the car, the fatty and I saw that there were few people around, so we soared into the sky and flew toward the Kunlun Mountains. About 1 hour later, we landed on a snowy peak in the Kunlun Mountains. It was also my first time here. Moreover, the surrounding area was covered with snow, so I couldn't see the whole mountain. After surveying the surroundings, the fatty asked, "What should we do next?" His question stumped me. Previously, the contract had only mentioned that the Kunlun Mountains would appear in the Kunlun Mountains, but it hadn't mentioned the exact location. The Kunlun Mountains were so vast that it was impossible to search everywhere. However, since the Kunlun Mountains were so mysterious, they would surely appear in a place that no one had ever set foot on. Since the snake spirit hadn't appeared yet, we could explore this mountain range. Perhaps we could find the location of the Kunlun Mountains. Since that was the case, I told the fatty what I was thinking, and he just had to follow me. After listening to me, the fatty didn't object and followed me. While flying, I observed the situation below. According to my guess, the place where the Kunlun Mountains appeared was different from the ordinary mountain range. However, the Kunlun Mountains were full of spiritual energy. If we wanted to find an unusual place, we had to follow the principles of geomancy. Previously, when we were observing the Kunlun Mountains from the foot of the mountain, we didn't feel anything special except for the accumulated snow. Now that we were flying, we felt that the Kunlun Mountains were endless. They were worthy of the name of China's Mount of 10,000 ancestors. Seeing this situation, we didn't continue to search in the sky. We waited until the fatty was exhausted before landing to recover. For the next 3 days, we searched the mountain range. However, besides finding dozens of places with good geomancy, we didn't find anything else. After a long time, we couldn't help but feel dispirited, and we wanted to give up. Right at this moment, we heard thunder in front of us. The sound was deafening, as if it was happening right next to us. We didn't find anything for the past few days, so the sudden sound naturally piqued my interest. It was obvious that the fatty heard the sound as well. He looked at me, and his thoughts were self-evident. I nodded at him, and the two of us quickly flew towards the source of the sound. After a short while, we arrived at our position. The scene in front of us surprised me. The mountain peak in front of us soared into the clouds, almost passing over our heads. The peak of the mountain was wrapped in a layer of clouds. From time to time, electric currents could be seen in the clouds. It seemed that the thunder came from the clouds. However, the clouds seemed to be a little unusual. Even with my cultivation, I couldn't see through it. Could it be that there was something strange about it? Or was there some secret hidden behind the clouds? The fatty seemed to have noticed this as well. He moved closer and said, "Third baby, I feel that there might be something in there. Should we go in and take a look?" I had the same thought, so I nodded and motioned for the fatty to come closer to me. Then I mobilized the Tao Chi in my body and enveloped him. Only then did I bring him into the clouds. I thought that with my cultivation, I should be able to break through the clouds. Unexpectedly, as soon as we touched it, a bolt of lightning flashed through the clouds and struck towards us. Before I could react, the lightning had already struck the barrier in front of me. In the blink of an eye, the barrier shattered, and the fatty and I flew backwards. Fortunately, the Tao Chi barrier resisted the attack. Otherwise, we would have been injured. After this attack, I didn't dare to underestimate the clouds in front of me anymore. I didn't know what the clouds were, but the power of the lightning was even more tyrannical than the heavenly thunder talisman of Mount Longhu. However, the more it was like this, the more I felt that there was something mysterious in the clouds. My curiosity was aroused. I circled the cloud and looked around, trying to figure out a way to get in. After a long time, I couldn't think of a way to enter, but I suddenly thought that we didn't need to go through the clouds at all. We just needed to move it away. With this thought, I immediately turned to look at the fatty. He had the demon refining gourd, which could absorb the heaven and earth. It was suitable to deal with the clouds. After I told the fatty, he slapped his thigh with a face full of joy. He quickly took out the demon refining gourd and waved it at the clouds. In a flash, the demon refining gourd produced a strong suction force that headed towards the clouds. The clouds quickly rushed towards the demon refining gourd in the fatty's hand. However, the lightning and the rain seemed to feel challenged, and the power of the lightning kept surging towards the demon refining gourd. However, the lightning couldn't escape the power of the demon refining gourd, and all of them entered the gourd. After a while, my vision became much clearer. After the clouds dispersed, I saw a stone tablet on the mountain peak dozens of meters in front of me. Chapter 836. Just as I was thinking about that, I noticed that the stone tablet in front of me was completely white. There weren't any words or symbols carved on it. Moreover, there weren't any fluctuations of aura on the stone tablet. This was different from the stone tablet on Billows Mountain. Could it be that this was just an ordinary stone tablet? I immediately denied this thought. If it was just an ordinary stone tablet, why would it have such a tyrannical lightning power covering it? Thinking about that, I became even more suspicious. I hurriedly called the fatty to fly towards the mountain peak. After we landed, I realized that the stone tablet was as tall as a person. Apart from that, there was nothing else around it. I stood in front of the stone tablet for a long time, but I didn't see anything special about it. I was really puzzled. Just as I was feeling depressed, there was a movement in Xiang Lu's pouch. I released my spiritual sense and found that the wooden box containing the dragon scripture was moving. I was stunned. Could it be that the snake's spirit had successfully comprehended it? Thinking about that, I hurriedly took it out. I heard some thumping sounds from the wooden box, as though something was trying to get out. I didn't delay and opened the wooden box. The cloth in the wooden box was emitting a dazzling golden light. In the blink of an eye, the cloth started to spin in the air. After a few seconds, a huge figure came out of the cloth. It was the snake spirit's real body. At that moment, his eyes were closed, and his body was wrapped in a faint yellow light. I had seen him like this when he had leaped over the dragon gate and transformed into a flood dragon. Now that he appeared again, I was delighted. It was obvious that the snake's spirit had comprehended the dragon scripture and was about to enter Kunlun to transform into a real dragon. Thinking about that, the snake's spirit suddenly woke up. His eyes shot out a golden light as he dashed towards us. I knew that the snake's spirit wasn't targeting us. It was just a subconscious release. I pulled the fatty to quickly dodge the attack and landed behind the snake spirit. He didn't continue to attack, but turned to look at the stone tablet. His action stunned me, but I quickly reacted. Could it be that the Kunlun that Shang-Chi had mentioned was inside the stone tablet? I was surprised, but the snake spirit's next action confirmed my thoughts. He hovered above the stone tablet and raised his head to roar. Sure enough, the monolith reacted, and a deep door suddenly appeared. At the same time, the spirit serpent did not delay. It twisted its head and slammed into the door. His actions reminded me of the time when we were at Dragon Gate Mountain. He had repeatedly rung the bell. Success or failure hinges on this one move. If we can break open this door, the snake spirit will transform into a true dragon, and I will be able to obtain the true dragon bone. This will be extremely beneficial to both of us. While he was thinking, the snake spirit had already hit the door. At this moment, I was also very nervous. I held my breath as I watched his movements. With a muffled sound, a crack appeared on the door from the snake spirit's impact, and an extremely strong aura was emitted from inside. I've never seen this aura before. Could this be the legendary power of a god? With that thought in mind, the snake spirit kept shaking its head. The impact from before must have made it feel a little uncomfortable. However, after a while, he knocked against the door again. This time, the door opened another inch. The snake spirit hit the door 9 times in a row. 9 was the extreme number. If it couldn't break the door after 9 times, it proved that the snake spirit did not have the opportunity to transform into a true dragon. Fortunately, the door was completely opened after the snake spirit hit it one last time. However, his head was already bleeding profusely. However, he didn't seem to care about it. He faced the sky and roared a few times. Then, he turned around and flew towards the door. Seeing this, I signaled the fatty to get ready. Previously, Shang-Chi had mentioned that the scale worm would shed its ordinary bones when it transformed into a true dragon. These ordinary bones were the true dragon bone that I had been searching for. When the fatty heard my order, he didn't dare to neglect it and stared in the direction of the door. As soon as the snake spirit's head touched the empty space behind the door, its face turned malevolent. Its huge body started to convulse, and it seemed to be in great pain. From then on, the scales on its body started to fall off. The bloodstained scales fell on the pile of snow. It was a ghastly sight. Seeing this, I couldn't help but frown. However, the snake spirit seemed to enjoy the process. It roared as it dashed towards the empty space. However, under such pain, its movements were too slow. It only took 15 minutes for it to pass through the dragon's head. At this time, only the scales kept falling off. There was no trace of the dragon bone. From the looks of it, the snake spirit might have to wait until it completely entered the empty space before it could be reborn. The snake spirit's current state was due to its own good fortune. Since we couldn't help it, there was no need to be so anxious. Thinking of this, I heaved a long sigh and calmed myself down. At the same time, I signaled the fatty to relax. He seemed to understand the meaning behind my words. His body relaxed, and the expression on his face eased up a little. The process of waiting was extremely long. Looking at the bloody scene in front of us was even more torturous. The fatty and I couldn't bear to watch it. Moreover, the snake spirit was struggling in pain. After waiting for nearly 6 hours, the serpent spirit's tail finally entered the void completely. Seeing this, the fatty and I heaved a long sigh of relief. However, we didn't dare to relax. Previously, I had predicted that after the snake spirit passed through the empty space, the true dragon bone would come out. It was a crucial moment, and we couldn't afford to be careless. The fatty seemed to know what I was thinking. He shook his body and focused all his attention on the door. All of a sudden, a dragon's roar came from the empty space behind the door. This dragon's roar was different from the one the snake spirit had emitted earlier. It was even more resounding and impassioned. It seemed the snake spirit had successfully tempered its bones and turned into a true dragon. While I was thinking, several bloodstained bones flew out of the empty space. These bones were brimming with spiritual energy. Seeing this, I was overjoyed. Then, I signaled the fatty to split up. After listening to me, he didn't delay and flew toward one of the dragon bones. Previously, I had told the fatty that we needed to obtain 3 true dragon bones on this trip. In my opinion, since the Shinon cauldron could reforge Shang-Chi's bones and regenerate his flesh, it proved that this method was feasible. It would be better to reconstruct the bodies of Lu Ruxu and her husband. As for the 3rd bone, it was prepared for Bayan. However, I also knew that Bayan couldn't enter the fire god temple as he pleased. This was just my backup plan. After the fatty left, I didn't waste any more time. My eyes locked onto the target, and I quickly grabbed 2 dragon bones. However, the dragon bones flew down the mountain and fell into the snow, disappearing in the blink of an eye. After seeing this, I became suspicious. I didn't know why such a situation had occurred. However, it wasn't the right time to worry about it. I didn't linger and asked the fatty if he had succeeded. After getting an affirmative answer, the 2 of us flew back to our original positions. After the fatty gave me the dragon bone, I threw it into the Shangliu pouch along with the other dragon bones in my hands. After everything was done, I heaved a sigh of relief. However, we weren't in a hurry to leave. Instead, we waited for the snake spirit to appear. However, the door seemed to be closing soon. If that was the case, the snake spirit would have to stay in Kunlun forever. Thinking about this, my heart tightened. I hurried to call the snake spirit. Fortunately, the snake spirit and I could sense each other. After he heard my call, he roared in the air and extended his golden dragon head. From his appearance, it was clear that he had regained his consciousness. However, it was possible that he hadn't had enough time in there. I couldn't help but get angry. I cursed and told him to get out of there. Otherwise, he would be imprisoned there forever. I wasn't trying to frighten him. Shang-Chi had mentioned that Kunlun was a place that only people who had ascended could cross. No one knew what was inside. If there was an immortal there, with the snake spirit's eccentric character, he would attract a lot of trouble. At that time, I wouldn't know and I wouldn't be able to help. After listening to me, the snake spirit didn't dare to be stubborn. He arched his body and flew out of the door. When his golden dragon tail leaped out, the door closed heavily and disappeared without a trace. After seeing this, I finally relaxed. However, the snake spirit seemed to be satisfied with his current appearance. He hovered above us, disappearing into the clouds. I took the chance to observe him. The serpent spirit's scales changed from their previous dull appearance to a golden color. However, there were 2 protruding parts on his back. I felt that they were strange, but I couldn't figure them out. After thinking about this, I called the snake spirit over and asked him about it. When he heard my question, he turned around and resumed his human form. He stood in front of me and said arrogantly, "Master Long, isn't my original form Inglong? Inglong has wings. Those 2 places should be where my wings are, but they haven't grown out yet." I was used to his rude behavior, so I didn't argue with him. However, it was true that he had mentioned Inglong. I also knew that after the snake spirit had become a real dragon, his appearance had changed and his power had increased. However, he was only a young god celestial master. If he wanted to become Inglong, he would need a lot of opportunities. Now that the matter was settled, we didn't need to waste time in this cold place. After thinking about this, I gestured for the snake spirit to return to my back. Then, I planned to leave with the fatty. At first, the snake spirit was a little reluctant. He said that he wasn't familiar with this body and didn't want to return. I knew that he wasn't telling the truth. He was just playing around. I tried to persuade him several times, but he wasn't moved. I could only use Tong Tong to persuade him. Then, he flew back to my back with a wronged face. After the snake spirit returned, I gestured for the fatty to fly in the direction we had come from. However, before leaving, I realized one thing. The stone tablet in front of us contained the Kunlun gate. If we hadn't removed the mist, we wouldn't have been able to find it. Kunlun was a very mysterious place. If we exposed it in front of the world, it wouldn't be appropriate. Now that we had succeeded, we should restore it to its original appearance. Everything had its own rules. We couldn't mess up. After thinking about this, I told the fatty what I was thinking and gestured for him to return the mist to its original position. After listening to my words, he agreed and took out the monster refining gourd to release it. The mist quickly returned to its original appearance. Chapter 837. The search for the dragon bones went smoothly. On the way back, the fatty and I were in a good mood. We chatted along the way, and soon we arrived at the place where we had parked our car. I was worried about Wu Yue's case, and I was eager to see how to regenerate the bones. I didn't linger and directly drove to Galmud Airport. Although everything went smoothly, we had spent a lot of effort. On the way back to the airport, the fatty felt sleepy. He curled up on the chair and fell asleep. This fellow's temperament had changed a lot recently. His words and actions had become more mature. Perhaps it was because he had reunited with Bai Ling that he had matured a lot. We didn't talk along the way. When we returned to the airport, we directly bought the earliest flight tickets. The next morning, we returned to Shu. When we returned to the Medicine King Valley, it was already noon. Just like last time, Bai Ling sensed our aura not long after we had entered the Medicine King Mountain. She came out to greet us and took us to the Medicine King Valley. When we arrived, the members of the witch tribe had been waiting for us for a long time. When we landed, she led her people to kneel in front of me and said, "Holy Sage." I didn't respond immediately. My eyes scanned the crowd, but I didn't see Nangong. I asked Bai Ling. He has something to do, so he left. I waved my hand, indicating that they didn't need to stand on ceremony. Then I took the fatty and Bai Ling and left, heading to the house at the foot of the mountain. Along the way, I asked Bai Ling when Nangong would leave and what he would be busy with. Since I knew about Nangong's plan, I paid more attention to him. Moreover, it was related to both the human and monster races. It was the most important thing. Of course, I had known Nangong's whereabouts. Bai Ling didn't hide anything from me. Not long after I left the Medicine King Valley, Nangong also left the Medicine King Valley. She didn't know where he had gone. Then, she hesitated for a while before telling me. Nangong's whereabouts are always secretive. She won't tell me much, and she won't tell me his whereabouts. After listening to Bai Ling, I was a little surprised. But soon, I remembered Bai An's whereabouts. I felt relieved. Nangong had always considered reviving the witch tribe as his mission. Moreover, he had traveled through time and space, so he was very cautious. Perhaps he didn't even trust the remaining members of the witch tribe in the Medicine King Valley. Thinking of this, I felt a little emotional. He doesn't trust Bai Ling, but he trusts an outsider like me unconditionally. I really don't know what to say. While I was thinking, we arrived at the house. Bai Ling arranged for the fatty and me to go back to our room to rest. She was going to instruct the others to refine the medicine. Since she was in charge of the Shinnon Cauldron, I had to listen to her arrangements. I nodded and stayed in the room with the fatty. Around 1 hour later, Bai Ling came again and told me that everything was ready. We could start now. Hearing this, my heart was filled with joy. We've been busy for the past few days, and now we're finally ready. Of course, everything wasn't over yet. While I was overjoyed, I was still a little nervous. Previously, Bai Ling had also mentioned that the previous examples of bone and muscle reconstruction had been around for thousands of years, and the ancient books only briefly introduced some of the methods. It was also her first time coming into contact with it, so she wasn't completely sure about it. There were no absolutes in this world. There were many factors that could affect the final outcome. Naturally, I wouldn't expect Bai Ling to guarantee that everything would go smoothly. Listening to her, I just nodded. Just try your best. Bai Ling bowed and said, "Saint, don't worry. Bai Ling will do her best." We left the room and quickly went to the Shinnon Cauldron. At this moment, the people of the clan had gathered there. Many of them were holding wooden boxes in their hands. It seemed that the boxes contained the medicinal materials that Bai Ling had mentioned earlier. Although I didn't know much about refining medicine, from the spiritual energy that these wooden boxes emitted, they should contain some rare and precious items. Thinking about this, I was a little curious and wanted to open them to have a look. With that in mind, I subconsciously walked toward the crowd. Bai Ling saw me and seemed to understand what I was thinking. She didn't say anything and directly went forward to open the boxes. There were all kinds of medicinal materials in those wooden boxes. I was a layman in this field, so I just looked at them curiously and didn't recognize any of them. Fortunately, Bai Ling explained the names and effects of these medicinal materials. Only then did I understand that these were extraordinary items. Apart from the Medicine King Valley, it was extremely difficult to find them in the outside world. What she said wasn't an exaggeration. Regenerating flesh and bones was a heaven-defying matter. The medicinal materials that could accomplish this definitely couldn't be tainted by the secular aura. The Medicine King Valley was a secluded place. Coupled with the abundant spiritual energy, it could nurture such extraordinary medicinal materials. After introducing everything to me, Bai Ling told me, "Everything is ready. We can start refining the pellets now." I was excited and quickly took out 2 dragon bones from the Shangliu pouch and handed them to her. After Bai Ling took them, she looked a little confused and asked, "Refining medicine only requires 1 real dragon bone. Why did Saint take out 2 dragon bones?" I planned to help Wu Yue and his wife rebuild their physical bodies at the same time, but I forgot to tell her. Hearing her question, I quickly told her about Lu Ruxu's identity and my plan in detail. After hearing that, Bai Ling's expression changed, and she quickly shook her head. "Saint, you don't know that Bai Ling has some confidence in rebuilding Wu Yue's physical body. However, it's impossible to rebuild 2 people's physical bodies at the same time." I was stunned and quickly asked why. Bai Ling sighed and replied, "Rebuilding the physical body is a move that reverses yin and yang and goes against the heavens to change one's fate. The process requires a huge amount of energy and isn't something that can be done by humans. The precious medicinal materials from before, including the real dragon bones, are just supplementary items. The real main effect is actually the Shinnon Cauldron. Although the Shinnon Cauldron is one of the top 10 divine tools, the process of rebuilding the bones consumes too much energy. The energy contained in the Shinnon Cauldron is only enough to rebuild 1 physical body. After that, it needs 100 years of nourishment. If you want to do it again, you have to wait for 100 years. After listening to her explanation, I finally understood the reason. I instantly heaved a sigh of relief and couldn't speak for a long time. It took 100 years to rebuild the bones. This meant that Lu Ruxu and Wu Yue still couldn't become real husband and wife. It also meant that Tao Wu couldn't use this method to become a human again. During the silence, I kept thinking about whether I should give up on my promise to Wu Yue and leave this opportunity to Tao Wu. After thinking for a long time, I let out a long sigh of relief. Firstly, I wasn't sure if the bone rebuilding method would succeed. Secondly, Tao Wu couldn't come out from the Fire God Temple. She could only meet me once every 6 months. So, it wasn't realistic to leave this opportunity to Tao Wu. Moreover, I had an agreement with Wu Yue. If I broke it now, I would be letting her down. After thinking it through, I felt relieved. Everything couldn't be perfect. The relationship between Tao Wu and I was deep. Even if she couldn't become a human in the end, she would still be my wife. It wouldn't affect anything. After feeling relieved, I nodded and told Bai Ling to follow her original plan to rebuild Wu Yue's physical body. Bai Ling nodded and didn't say anything else. She returned the extra dragon bone to me, then soared into the sky and flew towards the Shinnon Cauldron. At that moment, the fatty came over and whispered to me, "Third baby, I've never seen such a heaven-defying thing. Why don't we go and take a look at the situation? What do you think?" I was curious about what Bai Ling would do, but after thinking about it, I shook my head and rejected the fatty. There was only one chance. If the 2 of us were to go, it would be hard to avoid disturbing Bai Ling. If it were to fail because of our interference, it would be a great sin. The fatty also knew that this was a serious matter. Seeing that I had rejected him, he didn't say anything else. After standing beside me in silence for a moment, he sat down cross-legged and took out the ancient coins used for divination. He started fiddling with them. I lowered my head to take a look and immediately understood. He was worried about this matter, so he was trying to divine good or bad luck. The fatty's divination had always been accurate. When I saw his actions, my attention was instantly drawn over. I didn't care about the Shinnon Cauldron situation and focused on the fatty, waiting for the results of his divination. Soon, the fatty opened his eyes, but his expression didn't look good. After putting away the ancient coins in his hand, he stood up and frowned. He didn't make a sound for a long time. Seeing his strange expression, my heart skipped a beat. Could it be that he had encountered something bad? I hurriedly asked. The fatty was silent for a while, then shook his head. That's not the case. According to the divination, Wuyu has a high chance of successfully remodeling his bones. After hearing his answer, I was stunned. If the result of his divination was good, why did the fatty look so solemn? I didn't understand, so I hurriedly asked again. The fatty was still silent. After a while, he gritted his teeth and said to me, "Third baby, if it's possible, can you call Bai Ling back and let someone else cast the spell?" Let someone else cast the spell? I immediately understood. The fatty had divined that Bai Ling, the one casting the spell, would be in danger. At the same time, he knew that this matter was very important to me. That was why he had such an expression on his face. After the conversation with Bai Ling, I thought that the fatty had given up on her. I didn't expect that he was also an infatuated person. He was still thinking about Bai Ling. I hesitated for a while, but in the end, I brought the fatty and flew up to the Shinnon cauldron. When Bai Ling saw us, he frowned. "What do you need?" I didn't say anything, but gave the fatty a look. I wanted him to talk. The fatty was still worried about Bai Ling. He wanted to seize this chance to express his feelings to Bai Ling. It was a good thing. However, after seeing my eyes, the fatty shook his head and signaled me not to tell Bai Ling about his divination. His action put me in a difficult position. If I didn't tell him the truth, it would be hard to convince Bai Ling. After thinking about it, I decided to respect the fatty's decision. Feelings were the hardest to explain. Only the person involved would know what it felt like. If that was the case, I would listen to him. With that thought in mind, I asked Bai Ling, "Can you hand over this matter to someone else? I have something to discuss with her." Bai Ling was quite quick-witted. Maybe he heard something strange in my words, or maybe he noticed the conversation between the fatty and me. However, she didn't say anything. She just told me that in order to activate the Shinnon cauldron to refine medicine, one had to be at least a seal heavenly master. However, in the Medicine King Valley, she was the only one with such a cultivation base. Chapter 838. The meaning of my words was very clear. I wanted to replace Bai Ling. Bai Ling also understood my intentions. Perhaps she knew that I didn't have any other intentions, but she still shook her head and refused. The saints don't know that although Bai Ling's power is weak, she was fortunate enough to be recognized by the Shinnon cauldron as its master. With the Xianyuan sword in his possession, the sage must have known that once a divine weapon recognized its master, it would not listen to anyone else. Moreover, the saint has never learned the method of alchemy, and this matter concerns Wuyue's life. It doesn't seem appropriate to be so hasty. Her words were very reasonable, and I was speechless. I could only look at the fatty helplessly, indicating that I tried my best. Fatty understood and didn't force the issue. He lowered his head and looked dejected. In this way, the atmosphere became rather awkward. I could only bring the fatty back to the ground. However, before we left, Bai Ling told us to be careful and not to worry too much. It was obvious that he was trying to comfort us, but it was useless. Fatty's divination had never been wrong. It was just that he was unable to prevent all of this from happening, which made him feel rather uncomfortable. In the blink of an eye, the fatty and I had returned to our previous positions. Seeing his anxious face, I didn't know how to comfort him. If something unexpected happens, I will do my best to protect Bai Ling. The fatty's expression didn't change as he listened to me. He slightly nodded and stood at the side, staring at the Shinnon cauldron. In a short while, Bai Ling had finished inspecting the Shinnon cauldron. She then waved her hand and brought the wooden box in the hands of her tribesmen to the side of the Shinnon cauldron. Then, her temperament changed drastically. The sorcery chi in her body gathered on her hands and flew into the Shinnon cauldron. At this point, I understood that Bai Ling wasn't lying. Using the Shinnon cauldron to concoct medicine was not like using an ordinary cauldron to burn with an open flame. Instead, it was using the shaman chi in one's body to refine the medicine. Concocting medicine took a long time, so the amount of wizard chi consumed was rather large. If one was not a heavenly master or above, they would not be able to withstand such consumption at all. However, it was definitely not as simple as refining medicine this time. He did not know if the wizard qi in Bai Ling's body could last until the end of this matter. While he was thinking, Bai Ling's hands moved again. She opened all the wooden boxes beside her, picked a few herbs, and threw them into the Shinnon cauldron. At the same time, a wave of wizard qi energy appeared on his hands, and he threw it into the hole as well. In just a few seconds, the Shinnon cauldron actually produced a strange phenomenon, and its surface turned iron red. This did not happen even when the Flame Emperor's shadow appeared. I couldn't help but admire the alchemy skills of the Medicine King Valley. Just like that, Bai Ling no longer added any more herbs. I've heard about this before. In refining pills, other than having a complete set of medicinal ingredients, it was more important to master the heat control and the sequence of medicinal ingredients. After all, the properties of the medicinal herbs were different, so they had to be added at their own discretion. When Whitey moved again, it was already 2 hours later. During the past 2 hours, there had been no slip-ups. However, the more it was like that, the darker Fatty's expression became. It seemed that he was still worried about the previous divination. After all, things had progressed to a later stage, and if an unforeseen event were to occur, the harm would be unpredictable. Several hours later, nothing unexpected happened. However, the Shinnon cauldron had become transparent after the previous changes. From a distance, we could see what was going on inside very clearly. Since then, all the herbs in the wooden box had been refined by the Shinnon cauldron. Those herbs were indeed rare treasures. Under the power of the Shinnon cauldron, they still maintained their original appearance. However, as Bai Ling continuously transferred her wizard qi into the Shinnon cauldron, the herbs couldn't hold on for too long. They gradually turned into green smoke and swirled in the cauldron. Although there was nothing unusual about the alchemy, Bai Ling had used up a lot of her wizard qi. Her face was pale, and she looked exhausted. The fatty had been paying attention to Bai Ling's actions all the time. Naturally, he noticed the changes before I did. He moved closer to me and asked anxiously, "Can I help Bai Ling?" Of course, I understood the meaning behind his words. Then he flew to White E's side. Bai Ling was smart. She knew why I was there. Before I could speak, she said, "Saint, don't worry. Bai Ling can still hold on for a while." As she spoke, the veins on her forehead bulged. His current appearance was a sign of exhaustion. The fatty had asked me to help her, so I couldn't let her risk her life like that. I told her to rest for a while. I could perform the alchemy for her. While we were talking, Bai Ling's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. She hadn't thrown them into the dragon bones yet, but she was already exhausted. She wouldn't be able to endure the energy she was going to consume. However, after listening to me, she didn't stop immediately. Seeing her like this, I also felt a little anxious in my heart. After a long time, she panted and told me she didn't think that it would be so difficult today. However, alchemy had to be done in one go. Since the herbs were about to condense, we couldn't afford to be careless. Moreover, the Shinnon cauldron had recognized its master. Although we both cultivated wizard qi, there was still a slight difference. The Shinnon cauldron had its own intellect. I was sure it could sense it. If she suddenly retreated, the Shinnon cauldron would automatically stop. At that time, all of our previous efforts would be in vain. Of course, I didn't think that she was just trying to scare me. If the Shinnon cauldron recognized Bai Ling as its master, there must be a connection between them. If I forcefully joined, the Shinnon cauldron would reject me. If that happened, all of our previous efforts would be in vain. However, if I let Bai Ling consume her energy like this, she would be exhausted soon. I was touched by her spirit, but I couldn't force her. If something bad happened to her, I wouldn't be able to explain it to the fat man. However, I couldn't think of a suitable solution at the moment. I stood aside anxiously. Right at that moment, Bai Ling mumbled, "Here it is." Then, she threw the dragon bone into the Shinnon cauldron. Her action interrupted my thoughts. I couldn't help but feel happy. I had completely forgotten about Bai Ling's stamina. As soon as the dragon bone entered the Shinnon cauldron, it was shrouded in the mist created by the herbs. Although the Shinnon cauldron was transparent, I couldn't see what had happened to the dragon bone shrouded in mist. However, the fat man had told me that there wouldn't be any changes to the body. Since I couldn't tell him in detail, I didn't need to hurry. I just needed to wait patiently. With that thought, Bai Ling formed a sword with her fingers. A drop of blood oozed out from the tip of her middle finger. Seeing this, I was somewhat astonished. It was obvious that this drop of blood was Bai Ling's blood essence. The energy it contained was unimaginable. Does she want to throw it into the Shinnon cauldron to refine it together? In just a blink of an eye, the drop of blood soared into the sky. However, it didn't enter the Shinnon cauldron. Then, Bai Ling produced a mass of shaman energy in her hand. The mass of shaman energy turned into a silk thread that revolved around the drop of blood essence. In just a few seconds, the drop of blood essence expanded. In the blink of an eye, it exploded, turning into a blood mist that dispersed into the surrounding shaman energy. As soon as the shaman energy touched the blood mist, it became frantic. The energy inside the mist increased. Seeing this, I finally understood. Perhaps Bai Ling knew that she wouldn't be able to endure until the end of the refining process. That was why she wanted to use the power of her blood essence to strengthen the shaman energy. That way, she could satisfy the Shinnon cauldron's needs. However, there were only 10 drops of blood essence in a human's body. Once it was lost, it couldn't be regrown. Moreover, blood essence was closely related to one's life. Losing blood essence meant that one's lifespan would be shortened. Moreover, after losing blood essence, the body's origin would be damaged. It would take a long time to recover. With Bai Ling's current condition, the damage caused by losing blood essence would be more serious. While I was thinking, Bai Ling's face darkened. Her chest heaved up and down, and she vomited a mouthful of blood. Then, her body became a little unstable, and her eyes became dim and lifeless. I screamed. Bai Ling had used the power of her blood essence when she was exhausted. Her heavenly veins would be unstable, and her blood would attack her heart. Her life would be in danger. With that thought in mind, I dashed to her side and supported her falling body. Bai Ling's entire body was powerless. Her eyes rolled back and forth. After a few seconds, she fainted. The fat man on the ground sensed the situation. He flew up and took Bai Ling from my hand. He lowered his voice and said, "Leave her to me. Third baby, you shouldn't delay your business." The fat man didn't sound like he was blaming me, which made me feel better. However, Bai Ling had told me that I couldn't interfere with the Shinnon cauldron. I could only stand there and wait. Although Bai Ling's collapse was within my expectations, I was still caught unprepared. Fortunately, the Medicine King Valley was famous for their medicine. They could take care of Bai Ling's injuries. Moreover, the fat man and I didn't know much about medicine, so it was pointless to worry about it. With that thought in mind, I retracted my gaze and looked at the Shinnon cauldron. The witchcraft energy that had been soaring in the air had calmed down and was slowly flying into the Shinnon cauldron. It seemed that the witchcraft energy wasn't completely out of Bai Ling's control. After a while, the witchcraft energy landed steadily in the Shinnon cauldron. After a few seconds, the Shinnon cauldron returned to its original state. The only difference was that it started to shake violently and let out a buzzing sound. I had never seen such a scene before. However, I had learned from the people of the Medicine King Valley that when some rare elixirs were refined, the cauldron would have a strange phenomenon. The scene before me was similar to the strange phenomenon that the people of the Medicine King Valley were talking about. Could it be that the reconstruction of the body was successful? While I was thinking about it, the Shinnon cauldron started to spin again. The cauldron continued to emit white smoke. However, the white smoke didn't disperse but condensed and hovered above the Shinnon cauldron. It seemed that there was something inside. Although I was curious, the Shinnon cauldron didn't stop spinning, so I didn't dare to go forward to check. This process lasted for 15 minutes. After the Shinnon cauldron returned to its original state, it no longer emitted white smoke. As for the white smoke from before, it finally revealed the object within it after a series of flips. It was a woman wrapped in the white smoke. I was very familiar with her appearance. She was Wei Yu. However, She didn't have anything to cover her body. Her hands were soft, and her skin was smooth. Her cheeks were smooth, her nose was smooth, and her waist was slender. She had the appearance of a young girl, but she also had the charm of a mature woman. Chapter 839. Although it was indecent, it wasn't a good idea to let Wu Yue float like this. I looked around and raised my hand to call a female member of the witch tribe. I asked her to find some clothes for Wu Yue to wear. Then, I went over and carried the unconscious Wu Yue back to the room. After placing Wu Yue on the bed, I called Lu Ruxu out. Previously, when I was molding Wu Yue's bones, I deliberately asked Lu Ruxu to stay away. After all, Bai Ling and I weren't completely confident in this matter. If something happened midway, it would be too cruel for Lu Ruxu to see it with her own eyes. In the end, everything went smoothly. Naturally, everyone was happy. It was time to inform Lu Ruxu of the good news. When he came out, the first thing he saw was Wu Yue lying on the bed. In an instant, the expression on his face contorted. The ghost had no tears, and his face was twisted with joy. After a while, he calmed down slightly and carefully approached Wu Yue. He reached out and gently touched her body. With Lu Ruxu's cultivation, it was still possible for her to condense her body and touch the human body. After a light touch, he quickly retracted his hand, turned around, and knelt down in front of me. He was already incoherent. I smiled and comforted him. However, I felt a little guilty. Fortunately, when I planned to help him mold his bones, I didn't tell him this idea in advance. Otherwise, they would still be separated by yin and yang, and their ecstasy at this time would inevitably be reduced. After comforting him, Lu Ruxu carefully asked when Wu Yue would wake up. This was the first time I had experienced this kind of bone molding and rebirth. I didn't know much about the situation, so I told him that I needed to investigate to know. I laid Wu Yue's body flat and circulated my Dao Qi to my hands. Then, I pressed it on her forehead and used my spiritual sense to sense the fluctuations in her body. Outside the Spirit Lock Tower, I had seen the sacrificial evil spirit use this method. At that time, I was very curious about his technique and specially asked him for advice. However, he told me that this was the method of the Yang God Celestial Master. After I advanced to the Yang God level, my spiritual sense was strong enough, and I would naturally be able to use it. As expected, after advancing to the Yang God level, I comprehended it smoothly and naturally used it now. After some investigation, I found that Wu Yue's physical condition was not serious. It was just that his body had lost the fluctuation of Dao Qi. It seemed that he had completely become an ordinary person. Of course, the husband and wife wouldn't mind. After all, they were lucky enough to be reborn with the Shinnon Cauldron. Losing their cultivation might not be a bad thing for them. I retracted the Dao energy in my hand and told Lu Ruxu about Wu Yue's situation. Just as I thought, Lu Ruxu heaved a sigh of relief after hearing that Wu Yue was fine. As for the matter of losing his cultivation, he didn't even ask about it and didn't take it to heart. After listening to me, he thanked me again and sat by the side, quietly waiting for Wu Yue to wake up. After confirming that everything was normal on Wu Yue's side, I prepared to leave. Firstly, he did not want to disturb the couple. Secondly, he was worried about Bai Ling's injury. Previously, I had already predicted that Bai Ling's life might be in danger, but there's been no news yet, so I don't know what the situation is like. With this thought in mind, I told Lu Ruxu that I had something important to deal with. I waved my hand to stop him from sending me off and left. After going out, I walked along the small path and soon arrived at Bai Ling's residence. At this time, Bai Ling's room was surrounded by clansmen, but the door was tightly shut. It seemed that the people inside didn't allow them to disturb him. All the clansmen looked anxious. They were either pacing back and forth or standing on their tiptoes to look into the room. It seemed that they were eager to know the situation inside. When I arrived in front of them, many clansmen saw me. They quickly knelt and bowed, making way for me. The people of the Medicine King Valley were all cultivators who lived in seclusion, and the respect for their subordinates had long been engraved in their hearts. I had told them many times that they didn't need to be so polite, but it didn't work. Right now, I was worried about Bai Ling's injury, so I had no time to care about it. I just asked them who else was inside besides the fatty. Naturally, these people didn't dare to hide anything from me. They immediately answered that those with cultivation above the level of Shi Yao were all in the room to treat Bai Ling. According to common sense, it would be ridiculous for a cultivator of Shi Yao to treat a seal celestial master. However, the people of the Medicine King Valley were different. All of them knew medicine, and they couldn't be judged by common sense. Although their cultivation bases weren't high, when it came to medical skills, outsiders couldn't compare to them. I asked them how long they had been in the room and whether they had received any news about Bai Ling. Everyone shook their heads. Those people have been in there for 2 hours, but we haven't received any news. The clansmen were worried that they would disturb their diagnosis, so they didn't dare to go in. They could only wait at the door. I could see that Bai Ling was very important to the Medicine King Valley. When they said that, they looked sincere, as if they hated that they couldn't be in Bai Ling's place. I waved my hand and asked them to calm down. I would go in and check on your behalf. Then, I would inform you of the situation. Then, I carefully pushed the door open and entered the room. There were also many people in the room. I scanned them. My situation was much better than Bai Ling's. However, the Medicine King Valley had been passed down for thousands of years, so there might be similar cases. Let them check the ancient books first. If they could find a way, everyone would be happy. If they really couldn't find a way, it wouldn't be too late to discuss later. After getting my permission, everyone bowed and left the room, leaving only me and the fatty behind. At this time, the fatty came closer and whispered to me, "Third baby, Master told me about the time you went to the country of Green Hill to get the monster pellet. Bai Ling's current situation is not much better than mine. Do you think she can be treated with a monster pellet?" The fatty's idea wasn't strange. I had thought about it just now, but in order to get the monster pellet, I spent a lot of effort. Moreover, there was no extra monster pellet in the country of Green Hill. I had gotten it from cutting the former chief's belly. Where could I find it this time? The monster pellet was condensed in the body of a monster with Yang's spirit cultivation base. At present, only Yao Yao and the high priest had reached this realm in the country of Green Hill. If I wanted to get the monster pellet from the two of them, it meant that one of them had to give up his cultivation base and return to his original state. Both of them were very important to the country of Green Hill. Moreover, I had a close relationship with them, so I couldn't do it. I told the fatty that I couldn't do anything about it. After listening to me, the fatty sighed and nodded, indicating that he understood. If I can't find a solution in the Medicine King Valley, I will go back to the sect to ask Jinren Guan for help. It was the first time I had seen the fatty like this. Even when he was seriously injured, he didn't look so depressed. From this, it could be seen that this guy was indeed infatuated with Bai Ling. I sighed and patted the fatty's shoulder, comforting him. Bai Ling's injury isn't life-threatening. We still have time to find a solution. While we were talking, the clansmen who had left earlier came back. They had some information on their faces, but they were still frowning. I didn't know if they had found a solution. The fatty was naturally more anxious than me. Without waiting for me to speak, he quickly asked about the results of the search. After listening to the fatty's words, the leader of the clansmen sighed and said, "There is a solution, but I'm afraid the Medicine King Valley can only do a little." In that case, there was indeed a record in the ancient books of the Medicine King Valley. However, since there was a precedent, why were they so depressed? Was there an unspeakable reason? Without waiting for me to ask, the fatty moved closer to the crowd and asked anxiously, "Tell me, what do you mean?" The leader sighed and told us that the ancient books of the Medicine King Valley did record such a situation, but it wasn't easy to repair the tendons and vessels. The injured's meridians had been damaged, and their breathing wasn't smooth. They couldn't bear the strong impact of rare medicinal herbs. They could only use gentle energy to warm the injured's tendons and vessels for a period of time so that they could neutralize the strong nature of the herbs and achieve the goal of self-repair. Chapter 840. Since we've found the cure, Why did this man say that the Medicine King Valley can only do a little? Could it be that the Medicine King Valley can't gather all the required herbs? With that thought in mind, I hurried to ask him the whole story. The man shook his head and told me that the Medicine King Valley has the necessary herbs in stock, but the gentle energy I've just mentioned isn't available in the Medicine King Valley. That's why, besides telling me the cure method, they also asked me to look for it in the outside world. Then, he led his tribesmen to kneel in front of me. With tears streaming down his face, he told me that Bai Ling is the one chosen by the Shinon clan. She will lead the witch tribe to see the light of day again. If we can't get through this, the witch tribe will never be able to rise again. When he said that, I couldn't help but think of Nangong, who had shouldered the great task of reviving the witch tribe. It really moved me. When he mentioned that Bai Ling is the one chosen by the Flame Emperor, I was afraid he was referring to the Shinon cauldron recognizing her as its master. After talking with Nangong, I learned that the 10 divine tools are the key to opening the mountain and sea realm. Since the Shinon cauldron has recognized Bai Ling as its master, I can't let anything happen to her and delay the opening of the mountain and sea realm. Moreover, Bai Ling was injured to revive Wu Yue. In essence, it was also because of me. Also, because of my relationship with the fatty, I wouldn't refuse. However, I did have some thoughts about the mild energy that they mentioned. The people of the Medicine King Valley were all from the witch tribe, and they cultivated witchcraft energy. In essence, witchcraft energy was of the Yin attribute, and its nature was firm. That was why the man said that the Medicine King Valley didn't have any gentle energy. However, if we wanted to find this energy, we didn't need to go through the trouble of leaving the valley. The fatty and I both cultivated Tao energy, which was gentle and upright. My and the fatty's realms were higher than theirs, so they wouldn't be able to detect that we cultivated Tao energy. Moreover, with my identity, they would only think that the fatty and I were from the witch tribe. With that thought, I didn't think too much and told the people that we could start treating Bai Ling's injury. After hearing my words, the people looked surprised. They didn't know why I was doing this. This was an urgent matter, and I didn't want to hide it from them. I had to explain the reason to them one by one, signaling them to start preparing. Everyone came to a sudden realization after hearing this, but they still couldn't help but feel doubtful. Perhaps they also knew that no one had ever managed to cultivate 2 types of energy since ancient times. However, due to my status, they didn't dare to ask any questions and could only retreat to prepare the medicinal ingredients. After they left, I turned to the fatty and told him, "Don't be upset. I'll try my best to cure Bai Ling." After listening to me, he gave me a slight nod. He didn't answer me, but sat on the edge of the bed, gazing at Bai Ling. After a long time, he whispered to me, "Just leave the rest to him." The fatty's meaning was very obvious. He was saying that he didn't need to intervene in the matter of using Dao Qi to nourish Bai Ling. He could handle it himself. I could hear a tinge of anger in his voice. Perhaps it was because I had promised him that I would protect Bai Ling with all my strength, but I couldn't do it. However, although he was somewhat dissatisfied, I believed that he wouldn't fall out with me because of this. With that in mind, I didn't want to argue with him anymore. I nodded and agreed to his request. However, the other person had also said that Bai Ling's meridians needed to be nourished with Dao Qi for several days. During this process, he couldn't stop to rest. Although the fatty had a heavenly seal master cultivation base, he wouldn't be able to endure it for a long time without any rest. After weighing the pros and cons, I took out the jade bracelet on my chest and gave it to the fatty. Last time on Mount Huang, he had used the true dragon Qi in the jade bracelet to heal his wounds. However, there wasn't much true dragon Qi left in the bracelet. Moreover, I had fought many battles and consumed a lot of energy. I didn't know if I could endure until the healing process was over. While I was thinking, the fatty received the jade bracelet. Seeing him like this, I felt much better. I casually patted his shoulder and comforted him with a few words. At this moment, the other people knocked on the door again. They told me that everything was ready and that we could start to treat Bai Ling. After hearing that, we didn't delay any longer. However, we didn't know where to start. The person who came to report seemed to have noticed this. He told us that there was a secret room in the Medicine King Valley that was built for healing. All the required medicinal herbs had been transported there. He asked us to go with him. The fatty and I weren't in charge of this matter, so we could only follow their arrangements. Since the people of the Medicine King Valley were ready, we wouldn't delay any longer. I hurriedly asked the fatty to carry Bai Ling and follow that person. Since the matter here was settled, I wasn't in a hurry to follow them. Instead, I planned to check on Wu Yue's situation. After listening to my words, the fatty understood. He nodded, indicating that he would find someone to inform me if anything happened. Then, he carried Bai Ling and quickly left the room. After he left, I didn't linger and followed him. Half an hour later, I appeared outside my room. However, I didn't push the door open and enter. Previously, when I checked on Wu Yue's body, I knew that she had lost her cultivation. At this moment, I couldn't feel her aura. Out of respect for the couple, I didn't spread out my spiritual sense to check. I could only stand at the door and knock a few times to ask if it was convenient. After getting a response from inside, I pushed the door open and walked in. As soon as I stood still, I found that Wu Yue had woken up and was lying on the bed. However, her face was a little pale and there were obvious tear stains on her face. It was obvious that the couple had just talked about a lot of things. Seeing this situation, I also knew that I might have been a little presumptuous. I looked a little embarrassed. Wu Yue seemed to notice my expression and immediately wanted to get off the bed. However, her body was very weak and she couldn't stand up at all. I knew that she wanted to thank me, but she couldn't act rashly in her current state. I hurriedly stopped her. After listening to me, she didn't insist. She nodded and lay down again. However, she didn't miss a single word of thanks from her mouth. I didn't care too much about it. I waved my hand and said, "You don't need to be so polite." Seeing the couple like this, my heart was filled with emotions. Back then, when the two of them were separated by life and death, I was already so moved. The current situation was really fortunate. This increased my confidence in rescuing Bai-in. However, the only flaw was that Lu Ruxu still couldn't restore her physical body. I was afraid that she would need to wait for 100 years. However, Lu Ruxu was a ghost, and 100 years was like a white steed passing through a crack for her. However, Wu Yue was no different from a mortal. Even if she survived 100 years, she would probably be in her twilight years. Just as I thought of this, a thought appeared in my mind. However, I knew that the two of them had experienced 100 years of suffering, and perhaps they had become indifferent to cultivation. I couldn't make a decision for them. With this thought in mind, I told her about Lu Ruxu's body reconstruction. Then, I asked Wu Yue if she planned to continue cultivating. After listening to my words, she didn't immediately respond. Instead, she seemed to be weighing the pros and cons. Her actions showed that she was a very rational person. The decision she made after careful consideration was her truest thought. After a moment, she finally nodded, indicating that she was willing to start cultivating again. However, Lu Ruxu raised an objection. I didn't understand. This was a good thing for him and Wu Yue. So why did he object? Lu Ruxu seemed to have seen through my thoughts and immediately told me the reason. According to him, the path of cultivation was extremely difficult. For people without any foundation, it was even more difficult than ascending to the heavens. Wu Yue was originally the soul of the Fushi Zither. She coexisted with the Fushi Zither and was born with cultivation. Therefore, she didn't know the method of cultivation at all, nor had she experienced the pain of cultivation. Furthermore, once she embarked on the path of cultivation, nothing would go according to her wishes. On the contrary, being an ordinary person would be more comfortable. Since she had already become a mortal, there was no need to think too much and return to the life of an ordinary person. His words were indeed reasonable. Although I had benefited from the death scripture and didn't have too many obstacles in cultivation, I had been physically and mentally exhausted all these years. There were also many dangers of life and death. Only those who had experienced such difficulties would know that the path of cultivation was not as fascinating as ordinary people thought. However, I also heard other meanings from his words. The two of them had suffered for 100 years, so they were probably afraid of the separation of life and death. They were also tired of the deceit of the cultivation world and wanted to spend the rest of their lives by Wu Yue's side. However, since Wu Yue had decided to cultivate, she naturally had her own thoughts. Thinking of this, I was about to ask Wu Yue for her opinion again. Unexpectedly, she spoke first. My husband's words are wrong. Mr. Zhou was right. If I can't let you return to your normal appearance, Wu Yue will feel terrible. Wu Yue is a person who is about to die. It's a blessing from the heavens to be able to continue our relationship today. You and I have suffered for 100 years, so Wu Yue naturally wants to accompany you and share the family. However, Wu Yue is not satisfied with this. Wu Yue is willing to accompany you for a long time, even for eternity, and not suffer the pain of separation. If Wu Yue returns after 100 years, you will definitely be heartbroken. Wu Yue really doesn't want you to suffer such pain again. I hope you can fulfill my wish. After saying that, Wu Yue's tears streamed down. She inadvertently raised her hands, wanting to caress Lu Ruxu's face, but they passed through. This situation made her even more sad. Seeing this, I didn't say anything else. The couple's words were from the bottom of their hearts and reasonable, so I didn't dare to make a rash judgment. They still needed to discuss what to do. I sat on a chair for a long time without saying a word. Lu Ruxu and her husband didn't speak either. I could only hear Wu Yue's sobs. However, the two of them had already thought it through. It wasn't difficult to convince the other party. Chapter 841. Walking to Wu Yue's side, I sat down by the bed and asked her to give me her hand. Wu Yue obviously didn't know what I meant, but out of trust in me, she didn't ask. She did as I said and extended her right hand into my hand. I pinched her middle finger and began to mobilize the yang spirit in my body. In an instant, the yang spirit in my body spat out pure Dao Qi and gathered in my palm along the heavenly meridian. After waiting for a while for Wu Yue to get used to it, I sent this pure qi into her body through my middle finger. The middle finger was also known as Zhongqiang. It was connected to the extraordinary meridians. If I sent Dao Qi from here, it could pass through all the meridians and be nourished by Dao Qi. The Dao Qi was gentle and would not run amok after entering the body. After circulating in the meridians, it was stored in the Dantian. The moment the Dao Qi entered Wu Yue's body, her complexion improved. When the Dao Qi finally gathered in the Dantian, her face was already rosy, and her qi and blood were much stronger than before. For cultivators, pure Dao Qi entering the body would help improve their cultivation. If it was an ordinary person, having Dao Qi sent into the body would not only be able to cure diseases and relieve pain, but it would also provide an opportunity for their cultivation. I didn't dare to say that it would definitely regenerate Dao Qi in Wu Yue's body, but it could play a guiding role. In addition to her previous cultivation experience, there was a high chance that she could start cultivating again. This was the only thing I could do for Wu Yue. As long as she could feel the yin and yang qi, she would be able to stimulate the pure Dao Qi in her body, which would be of great help to her future cultivation. I had originally considered giving her some of the techniques recorded in the death scripture. After all, the techniques in the scripture were all-encompassing, and there were many that I hadn't had time to cultivate. In response to Wu Yue's current situation, the death scripture also recorded a technique that was particularly suitable for her to cultivate. With this as a starting point, after she recovered, her cultivation speed would increase very quickly. However, after this idea came to mind, I thought about it and remembered that Bayan had repeatedly warned me not to show the death scripture to others. In the end, I gave up on this idea. The power of the death scripture's cultivation method is indeed extraordinary, but this item is of great importance. Although I don't know the hidden meaning behind Lao AI's words, combined with my experiences in recent years, I can deduce that the death scripture definitely has a great secret. If Wu cultivates the cultivation method inside, it might not be a good thing for her. After giving up on this idea, I thought about other cultivation methods that were suitable for Wu Yue's current situation. However, due to the existence of the death scripture, I wasn't interested in other cultivation methods at all, nor did I study them. I couldn't think of any suitable cultivation method at the moment. Seeing that I was deep in thought, Lu Ruxu came over. She seemed to have guessed my intentions from my actions and immediately knelt down. She said emotionally, Lu Ruxu doesn't know how to repay Master's great kindness. This pure chi of the Tao is the foundation of a yang spirit. Master's gift to me really makes me panic. Lu Ruxu was indeed a former Taoist of Mount Longhu. She was indeed knowledgeable. This pure chi of the way was the foundation of the yang spirit and was far more precious than blood essence. It was precisely because of its preciousness that it was of great benefit to Wu Yue. If an ordinary person in the yang spirit realm forced the pure chi of the way out of their body, it would damage their foundation. It would take a long time for the yang spirit to completely recover. However, for me, although the yang spirit was slightly damaged, I had taken the saliva of the true dragon back then. The meridians in my body were strong, and my foundation was strong. I had far more blood essence than others. After cultivating the yang spirit, the foundation of the yang spirit was also far superior to others. Even if it was slightly damaged, it wouldn't be a big deal. After some nourishment, it would recover to its original state. This was also the reason why I had decisively handed the pure chi of the way to Wu Yue. After hearing Lu Ruxu's words, Wu Yue finally understood how important the chi of the way that I had injected into her body was to me. She hurriedly got up and wanted me to take it back. I smiled faintly and comforted her. I then told the couple about the secret behind the matter. After hearing what I said, the two of them thanked me gratefully again, accepting my gift. After letting Wu Yue lie down again, I called Lu Ruxu and told her what I was worried about. After hearing that, Lu Ruxu waved her hand and told me not to worry. He had read many cultivation techniques on Mount Longhu when he was alive. Later on, he had studied the second volume of the Death Scripture. In Wu Yue's situation, he could design a cultivation technique for her to cultivate. After hearing that, I also understood. Although Lu Ruxu's cultivation base wasn't too high, she had a deep understanding of cultivation techniques. I didn't need to worry too much about this matter. Thus, I nodded and didn't worry too much. I asked him to take good care of Wu Yue. I wouldn't stay here any longer, leaving some space for the couple. The matter of Lu Ruxu and her husband had been settled, and I felt much more relaxed. Right now, Bai Ling's situation was even more critical. I planned to go there to take a look. Thus, I bid farewell to the two of them. After leaving the room, I planned to find the people of the Medicine King Valley and ask where the fatty and the others were. Unexpectedly, after walking for a quarter of an hour, I didn't find anyone. After thinking for a while, I understood that the people of the Medicine King Valley had gone to the secret place where Bai Ling was being treated. They were waiting for news. Thus, I flew up and released my spiritual sense to search for the fatty's aura. After flying away from the village for half an hour, I found the fatty's aura in a kernel. While I got closer, I saw that many temporary huts had been built outside the kernel. It seemed these people planned to stay here for a long time. It seemed Bai Ling was very important to the Medicine King Valley. Otherwise, the members of the witch tribe wouldn't be like that. Soon, I descended from the sky and arrived outside the kernel. When the members of the witch tribe saw me, they immediately knelt to greet me. I had told them many times about this etiquette, but they were still like this. I had no choice but to let them be. After they greeted me, I asked them about the current situation. They told me that Bai Ling had just entered. At this moment, they didn't know if the treatment had started or not. I turned around and looked at the kernel. From the sky, it was just a small kernel. However, when I landed on the ground, I found that there was a 10-meter-high rock hidden in the kernel near the peak. There was a 2-meter-wide cave. At this moment, there was a constant fluctuation of Tao energy in the cave. The fatty's aura was also there. From the fluctuation of Tao energy, the healing process had most likely started. I was about to go there to check, but the members of the witch tribe told me that when the fatty had brought Bai Ling and some herbs into the cave, he had specifically told the members of the witch tribe not to enter the cave. It was because he was using Tao energy to nurture Bai Ling's meridians. The members of the witch tribe were also afraid that something might happen, so they didn't enter the cave. They all stayed there and waited for their news. After listening to their introduction, I focused on the cave. I found that the fatty had set up a formation outside the cave. It seemed he didn't want anyone to disturb him. I was a little worried. With the fatty's actions, if something happened on the way, the people outside wouldn't know, and they wouldn't be able to save him. It was really unwise. However, after thinking about it, the fatty was too worried. In that case, I might as well stay here and pay attention to their situation. If something happened, I would be able to react immediately. With that in mind, I told everyone to go back first and leave me here alone. The members of the witch tribe were worried about Bai Ling's situation. After hearing what I said, they looked hesitant. I didn't use my identity to forcefully drive them away. I just told them that I had the cultivation of a young god celestial master. If something really happened inside, I would know immediately. Moreover, I had the ability to save him. Even if they stayed here and knew the situation inside, they wouldn't be able to help much. After some persuasion, they nodded and didn't insist. They got up and left, heading back to the village. Actually, I had a selfish reason for letting them go back. At this time, Wu Yue's situation was still unstable. If I stayed here, I couldn't divert my attention to take care of her. I let the people of Medicine King Valley go back. If anything happened to Wu Yue, they could take care of her immediately. After the people of the witch tribe left, I flew to the entrance of the cave. Of course, I didn't intend to go in. I just spread out my spiritual sense to check the situation inside. However, I didn't expect that the fatty's formation would actually block my spiritual sense outside. I had never seen such a method, which really surprised me. Helpless, I could only sit down cross-legged and adjust my breathing while paying attention to the movements inside. Previously, after transferring the pure Taoist qi from the Yang God to Wu Yue, although the damage to the Yang God wasn't great, it was still a hidden danger. So, I took advantage of this time to heal my injuries. If something really happened to the fatty, I would completely get rid of my injuries, which would be the greatest help to the fatty. I sat there for several days. During this period, I had been paying attention to the fluctuation of Taoist qi in the cave. A few days ago, the fatty's aura was still stable, but after another day, I noticed that he seemed to be a little exhausted. This state lasted for several hours. It seemed that the fatty didn't absorb the true dragon qi in the jade bracelet immediately. After thinking about it, I guessed that he knew that there wasn't much true dragon qi left in the jade bracelet, so he planned to use it at the most critical moment. In this regard, the fatty was very rational. After a while, the fatty finally couldn't hold on anymore. The aura of the jade bracelet came out of the cave. It was obvious that the fatty had begun to absorb the true dragon qi in the cave. With the true dragon qi in the jade bracelet, the fatty's aura stabilized a lot and returned to a calm state. Unknowingly, several days had passed. Previously, the doctor of the Medicine King Valley had said that if everything went well, Bai Ling's condition would stabilize in half a month. But now, half a month had passed, and the fatty and Bai Ling still hadn't appeared. I was a little worried. Fortunately, the fatty's aura was still coming from the cave, and it was very stable. So, I didn't act rashly and just waited anxiously. Another 2 days had passed, and there was still no news from the cave. I kept thinking that something had happened. As I was anxious, I took out the sound-transmitting talisman and sent the fatty a message. However, after sending the message for a long time, there was still no response. This made me even more anxious. But then, I thought that half a month had just passed, and it was a critical moment. Perhaps the fatty didn't have time to deal with it. While I was thinking, the formation at the entrance of the cave suddenly disappeared. When I saw that, I was overjoyed. It was obvious that the fatty had removed the formation. So, Bai Ling's matter had been settled. With that thought in mind, I flew up and landed at the entrance of the cave, waiting for the two of them to come out. Shortly after, the two of them appeared in the cave. Bai Ling was supporting the fatty, slowly walking toward the entrance of the cave. From the looks of it, the fatty had used up a lot of energy during the past few days. Anyway, I was lucky that I had given him the jade bracelet. It shouldn't be a big problem. Chapter 842. From their affectionate looks, it wasn't difficult to understand that the two of them had already untied the knot in their hearts. It seemed that the fatty's efforts were fruitful. I was gratified that he could have such a good fate. Since that was the case, I brought the two of them back to the village. Since then, the matter of the Medicine King Valley had been completely resolved. However, I wasn't used to the sudden leisure. However, the fatty's injuries hadn't healed yet, so there was no need to leave in a hurry. After a few days, the fatty had finally recovered, and Bai Ling had also fully recovered. Recently, the two of them had been going in and out together. Their words were filled with love, as if they were a pair of immortal lovers. Looking at the fatty's appearance, it would be too cruel to let him leave with me. With that thought, I gave up on the idea and planned to leave alone. I found Bai Ling and told her about my intention to leave the Medicine King Valley. After hearing that, she looked a little confused and asked if I had anything else to do. I was stunned and pondered for a while. It seemed that there was nothing urgent to deal with, but I wasn't used to being so idle here. After hearing my words, Bai Ling didn't know how to persuade me, so she quickly gave the fatty a look. The fatty naturally understood. He moved in front of me and said softly, "Third baby, since you have nothing to do, why don't you stay here? It's not easy to have some free time, so it's good to stay here and look at the flowers and plants. Moreover, the Medicine King Valley is rich in spiritual energy, so it's very suitable for cultivation." The fatty's words made sense. Ever since I had advanced to the Yang God Celestial Master rank, although my strength was much stronger than before, I was still far from being able to save Tao Wu. It hadn't been half a year yet. If I returned to the Fire God Temple, I wouldn't be able to see Tao Wu. Suddenly, I really had nowhere to go. It would be better to listen to the fatty's words and stay in the Medicine King Valley to cultivate. However, although the Medicine King Valley was rich in spiritual energy, it wouldn't be of much help to me. With that thought, I suddenly realized that ever since I had practiced the heaven-devouring art, I hadn't read the death scripture for a long time. It was rare for me to have such free time, so I had enough time to learn a new cultivation technique. With that thought, I agreed to the fatty's request. Seeing that I had agreed to stay in the Medicine King Valley, the two of them were quite happy. They told me that if I needed anything. After chatting for a while, I didn't disturb the two of them. I planned to find a secluded place to practice my new cultivation technique. Eventually, I decided to go to the cave where Bai Ling had been treating his wounds. That place was a little remote, and unless there was something important, the people of Medicine King Valley would not go there to disturb them. Having made up his mind, he didn't waste any more time and directly flew toward the colonel. 15 minutes later, I landed in the middle of the cave. I was just standing outside the cave earlier, so I didn't know what was going on inside. Now that he looked at it, the cave seemed to have some craftsmanship. It was obvious that the people of the Valley of the Medicine Masters had specially excavated it. However, the cave was very obvious, and there was nothing special about it. It was unknown why this place was specially chosen as a place to recuperate. I was extremely curious and didn't immediately start cultivating. Instead, I wandered around the cave. I made a new discovery after this trip. At the end of the cave, there was a smaller space. The walls here actually had Nangong's aura. Not only that, but there was also an aura of Dao Qi. These two auras were very weak, and with my strength, if I didn't pay too much attention, I would have easily ignored them. What puzzled me was that this was the territory of Medicine King Valley, so it wasn't difficult to understand why Nangong's aura was in this cave. Perhaps he had also been treating his wounds here. However, it was a little strange that there was a Taoist aura in this place. Previously, the fatty had brought Bai Ling here to recuperate. If this aura was left by the fatty, then it was understandable. However, the fatty was always by my side, so how could I not know his aura? Moreover, with the fatty's strength, even if the aura he left behind was weak, it would still be detected by me immediately. Moreover, this Taoist aura seemed to have been here for a long time, almost the same time as when Nangong had arrived. Could it be that that person had a grudge against Nangong and was chasing him here? This thought suddenly appeared in my mind, but was immediately denied by me. Nangong had always been a meticulous person, and it was difficult to find his traces. Since I knew him, I had never heard of him having a grudge against anyone. Moreover, Nangong had previously said that this Medicine King Valley was the only remaining branch of the sorcerer tribe. Even if he was being chased by an expert, he would definitely not be lured here, or else the sorcerer tribe here would have been destroyed long ago. Thinking of this, I suddenly had a strange thought. Could it be that Nangong had made a deal with that person, and that was why he had specially brought him here? However, the world was so big, so why did Nangong bring him to Medicine King Valley, and even choose this cave to recuperate in? Could it be that there was something special about this cave? The thought in my mind wasn't without foundation. Previously, I was wondering why the people of Medicine King Valley dug a cave here, but I'm sure it wasn't just to find a secluded place to recuperate. However, I had already been here for a while, and other than the 2 auras on the wall, I didn't find anything else. Since this place was dug by the people of Medicine King Valley, I would have to go back to the village to ask if I wanted to know more. Right now, I was very concerned about anything related to Nangong. Although he had already told me what he was planning, there were still many things that he hadn't told me. Moreover, when I had returned to the Fire God Temple, I had learned from Shang-Chi that everything that Nangong had planned was under Emperor Ku's control. This meant that in essence, Nangong and I had the same fate. We were both pawns of the ancient people. Although this was our fate, how could I not want to know what was going on? However, Shang-Chi would never tell me the reason. If I wanted to find the truth, I had to start from Nangong. Thus, the current situation really made me curious, and I wanted to understand it clearly. Having made up my mind, I didn't stay here any longer. I turned around and flew out of the cave, heading back to the village. When I returned to the village, I saw the fatty and Bai Ling walking up the mountain hand in hand. They seemed to have noticed me, and immediately stopped and looked at me. After I landed, they walked over and asked me where I had been. I was quite anxious about the cave, so I didn't pay attention to their words. I asked Bai Ling if she knew the origin of the cave. When Bai Ling heard me suddenly ask about it, a trace of doubt flashed across her face. However, she might have seen my anxious expression, so she didn't say much and immediately told me that the cave had been there for thousands of years. According to the elders, it was the tribe leader who gave the order to dig cave there, but no one mentioned why. Naturally, she wouldn't hide anything from me. However, the more she did this, the more I felt that the cave was strange. Thinking about this, I probed her and asked if she had noticed anything unusual about the cave. Unexpectedly, she had a dull expression and looked at me while shaking her head. Her reaction was understandable. The Medicine King Valley had been in seclusion for thousands of years, and some of their thoughts were already deeply ingrained. Questioning the elders was disobedience, so she definitely wouldn't dare to offend them. This was something that I had neglected previously. It seemed that the people of the Medicine King Valley wouldn't know what was special about the cave. However, I had learned about everything from the tribe's ancient books. Since ancient times, some important matters wouldn't be told orally, but recorded in writing to preserve them for thousands of years. In this way, I might be able to find information about the cave in the tribe's ancient books. Thinking about this, I told Bai Ling what I was thinking and asked if I could go and read the tribe's ancient books. After hearing this, Bai Ling didn't immediately respond, but held her chin with one hand, as though she was weighing in her heart. The fatty at the side also seemed to see that this matter was very important to me, but he didn't persuade her. Perhaps he could understand, like me, that the tribe's ancient books could be said to be confidential, and even the tribe members couldn't casually flip through them. Although I had the identity of a saint, I wasn't a member of the witch tribe. If I were to casually flip through them, I was afraid that many secrets would be revealed. However, if I used my identity as a saint to pressure her, Bai Ling wouldn't say much. However, if I did so, I was afraid that it would hurt the harmony between us. At that time, I would be in the wrong in front of Nangong. After a while, Bai Ling still didn't respond. It seemed that this matter was indeed a little difficult for her. Seeing this, I could only take a step back and indicated for her to send someone to check it out. If there was any relevant information, she could just inform me. Seeing this, Bai Ling's body relaxed, and she quickly agreed. Then, She excused herself and left, telling me to give this order to the others. After she left, the fatty came to me and thanked me in a low voice. His words surprised me, but I immediately understood. Perhaps he was thanking me for not making things difficult for Bai Ling, considering the friendship between the fatty and me. He didn't need to thank me. But now, he was treating me like an outsider. It seemed he really cared about Bai Ling. I didn't reply to him. I was afraid that Bai Ling wouldn't come back for a while. I wanted to take this chance to have a good chat with the fatty. The fatty seemed to know what I was thinking. He took me to stroll around. On the way, I asked the fatty, "What do you plan to do next?" Of course, it was just a casual chat. What I meant was that the fatty should quickly give Bai Ling a status. The fatty had suffered a lot while staying with me. Moreover, he was about the same age as me. I had been married for many years, but he still hadn't gotten married yet. Now that he and Bai Ling were in love with each other, it was a good opportunity. The sooner they got married, the sooner Uncle Lin could enjoy his family. Apart from that, I had another consideration. The fatty and Bai Ling were the masters of the divine tools. Once the time was right, they would gather outside the mountain and sea realm. As soon as the mountain and sea realm opened, the human and monster races would clash again. At that time, it would be a reign of terror. Everyone would be in danger. I didn't want them to regret it. The fatty seemed to understand my intention. He told me that he had an idea. He planned to go back to his hometown and bring Uncle Lin to the Medicine King Valley. His family would live there. Seeing the fatty look forward to his future life, I didn't have the heart to tell him about my worries. Chapter 843. Hearing that the fatty had his own plan, I didn't ask further. I just wished him well in my heart. After talking about this, we chatted for a while. The fatty asked me why I was in such a hurry. Did something happen in the cave? I didn't hide it from the fatty and told him what I had found in the cave. However, I didn't mention my previous speculation. I just said that I was curious about it. It wasn't that I wanted to hide it from the fatty, but it was too complicated. It wasn't something that could be explained in a short time. When the fatty heard my words, he frowned slightly, as if he couldn't understand. Just as he was about to ask something, Bai Ling hurriedly rushed back. Seeing her come back, I got excited and waited for her answer. Unexpectedly, when I got closer, Bai Ling had an apologetic expression on her face. After calming her breath, she told me that when she went back, she asked the people of Medicine King Valley to flip through all the ancient books, but they couldn't find any information about the cave. The ancient books of the witch tribe didn't record it either. Even if I wanted to find more clues, I wouldn't know where to start. However, I wasn't discouraged. The deeper it was hidden, the more it proved that there was something fishy about the cave. At this time, Bai Ling asked me, "Why are you suddenly interested in that cave?" I had already told the fatty about this, so there was no reason for me to hide it from Bai Ling. I immediately repeated what I had just said. After listening to me, Bai Ling frowned and shook her head. I often go to that cave. A few days ago, I was healing there, but I didn't find anything. It was normal that she couldn't find anything, but it would be strange if she could. Those two auras were extremely weak, and they were very old. Even I had almost missed them. With Bai Ling's cultivation, it was impossible for her to find them. After carefully explaining it to her, Bai Ling nodded to show that she understood. Then, she asked me, "Can we go together to check?" As Bai Ling was from the Medicine King Valley, she might be able to find something that I hadn't noticed before. I thought for a while and nodded. Then, I brought the two of them to the cave. When we reached the cave, we walked into the narrow space. I pointed at the place where I had sensed the aura for them to see. However, even though they were right in front of us, they still couldn't sense anything even after sensing for a while. I had already expected this, so I wasn't surprised. With their cultivation, it was indeed difficult for them to sense it. Since I couldn't find anything, Bai Ling naturally couldn't make any suggestions. My previous plan had failed. The three of them discussed for a while more, but they still couldn't come up with any valuable clues, so they could only give up and ask Nangong later. After temporarily putting this matter aside, I asked the fatty and Bai Ling to leave. I stayed here and prepared to cultivate. There were many cultivation techniques in the death scripture, and they were extremely powerful. Once I started cultivating, I wouldn't be able to finish in a short period of time. To prevent others from disturbing me, I used a wisp of shaman energy to seal the entrance of the cave. Only then did I choose a spot against the wall and sat down cross-legged. I took out the second volume of the Death Scripture from my Shangliu bag and casually flipped through it. The sky-swallowing incantation I learned previously was a cultivation method of the Seal realm. Now that I have advanced to the Yang Spirit stage, I naturally need to practice a cultivation method of a higher realm. Thus, I skipped the part about the Seal realm and started reading from the back. While reading, I thought of the sky-swallowing incantation. This cultivation method could only be used to devour the power of those whose realm was lower than mine. In the path of cultivation, endlessly increasing one's power wasn't a shortcut to increasing one's realm. In fact, if one's power increased too quickly, their state of mind wouldn't be able to keep up. It would be easy for them to go berserk and fall into a dangerous situation. From this point of view, the sky-swallowing incantation was of little value. However, if one didn't look at the situation of the battle and only analyzed its original effect, the sky-swallowing incantation was extremely overbearing. Not to mention ordinary power, I had even swallowed the enormous Tai Sui in the Jade Buddha Temple. Without this cultivation method, I was afraid that it would have been impossible to accomplish. Speaking of this, I suddenly had doubts. When I swallowed the Tai Sui, the Death Scripture happened to have such a limited cultivation method. Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? After thinking about it carefully, this matter wasn't normal. It wasn't as simple as a coincidence. It seemed that my previous guess that the Death Scripture was related to Emperor Ku's scheme wasn't baseless. There are already too many conspiracies surrounding me. Discovering a few more wouldn't change anything. Thus, after some thought, I threw it to the back of my mind and didn't think too much about it. I devoted myself to cultivation. After searching through the Death Scripture, I quickly found an interesting cultivation method. This cultivation method was rather familiar. It was somewhat similar to the unique cultivation method of the Fox clan that I had seen in the Green Hill country. According to the records, this was a method of transforming Taoist qi into form. As long as one meditated, the Taoist qi in one's body could transform into whatever one wanted and then leave the body. Simply put, it was to condense the Taoist qi in one's body and use it as a weapon. The Taoist qi leaving the body was very common. I was already familiar with it when I was in the Earthmaster realm. As for transforming Taoist qi into form, I had also experimented with it and used it many times against enemies. However, in reality, the transformation I used was just an imitation. For example, condensing Taoist qi into a long saber and using it to slash at the enemy. However, in reality, it was only condensing Taoist qi into the shape of a long saber and not actually transforming it into a long saber. The transformation method recorded in the Death Scripture could allow Taoist qi to leave the body and condense it into a real entity. Through the combination of visualization techniques, it could be transformed into an object of one's own imagination and used against the enemy. The power was quite astonishing. After carefully reading through it, I had a slight understanding. I adjusted my aura and began to practice according to the steps above. This method could only be practiced by the Yang God Celestial Master and could only be used in conjunction with the Yang God. Thus, I followed the description and extracted the Taoist qi from the heavenly veins. After circulating it several times in my body, I sent it to the Life Palace where the Yang God resided. Through the Yang God in the Life Palace, it was compressed into a visualized form and then used by the Yang God. The Yang God and the cultivator's life were one. After the Yang God was used, the cultivator could also use it and send it to the outside world to fight against the enemy. This method didn't seem difficult, but it was very dependent on the control of the Yang God. It hadn't been long since I had advanced to the Yang God level, and I had only used the Yang God to fight twice. I wasn't very proficient in controlling the Yang God, so it was quite difficult to practice this method. Every time the Taoist qi entered the Life Palace, the process of using the Yang God to compress it into shape was very difficult. I tried many times, but it ended in failure. In the end, I tried to forcibly control the Yang God, but I still failed and almost hurt it. After trying several times, the abundant Taoist qi in my body had been consumed by more than half. I had no choice but to temporarily stop practicing this method. After sitting cross-legged and thinking for a moment, I remembered that when I was browsing the death scripture, I had seen a cultivation method to temper the yang god. Every time I failed before, it was because I couldn't control the yang god well. If I practiced this method to temper the yang god first, I should be able to get twice the result with half the effort later. After thinking it through, I temporarily put aside the method to transform the Taoist qi into shape and began to study this method to temper the yang god. This method directly affected the yang god, so it seemed quite dangerous. It mentioned that during the tempering process, one needed to transfer all the blood essence in the body to the life palace and fuse with the yang god. After the yang god absorbed the blood essence, the mind could become one. Blood essence was the foundation of the body. Losing a drop meant that one's cultivation and lifespan would be reduced. In this sense, this method was really frightening. Moreover, there were only a few specific descriptions, and they weren't very clear. If it weren't for the method recorded in the death scripture, I probably wouldn't have tried it. After studying it, I let out a long breath and threw away all distracting thoughts. I calmed my breath and prepared to use this method to temper the yang god. There were only 10 drops of blood essence in the human body. Essence was the yang of yin, and blood was the yang of yin. They came from the same source. I closed my eyes and forced a drop of blood essence to float outside the meridian of the heavens. I didn't expect that forcing the blood essence to the meridian of the heavens would be much more difficult than forcing it out of the body. I couldn't figure out the reason for this at the moment. After I forced out all the blood essence, I felt weak all over and couldn't continue the next step. As such, I didn't rush to force the blood essence into the life palace. Instead, I quickly adjusted my breathing to adapt to this feeling. I didn't know how many days had passed before this feeling of weakness completely disappeared. After my body's condition returned to normal, I didn't delay any longer. I mobilized the Tao energy in the meridian of the heavens and wrapped the drops of blood essence floating outside the meridian of the heavens. Once everything was ready, I forced the blood essence, which was wrapped in Tao Qi, into my life palace. However, before I could do anything, I felt a swelling pain in my head, as if it was about to explode. Every nerve in my body felt an intense pain. If it was physical pain, I could endure it for a while, but the pain in my nerves was really hard to resist. At the same time, I noticed that as soon as the blood essence reached the life palace, it quickly revolved around the yang god. As it spun faster and faster, the pain in my nerves became more intense. I hugged my head and fell to the ground. My body convulsed rapidly, and I was sweating profusely. I knew that the pain would last for a while and would only get stronger. However, I didn't have any strength in my body at the moment. My mind was blank except for the pain. I had no way to deal with it. I had no choice but to recall many things in the past to distract myself. After an unknown period of time, the tingling sensation in his head suddenly disappeared. However, my body was also very empty at the moment. I didn't have the strength to sit up and could only lie on the ground, panting. After several hours, her soft body finally regained some strength. I relied on this strength to support myself and slowly mobilized the Tao energy in the meridian of the heavens to my whole body. After the Tao energy had circulated a few times, my body finally returned to normal. Chapter 844. In the life palace, the blood essence that had been flying around the yang spirit had disappeared, but there was a change in the yang spirit. The yang spirit, which originally looked like Tai Sui, had changed its appearance, but I couldn't see any clues at the moment. After thinking about it carefully, it might be related to the blood essence. Thinking of this, I didn't worry about it anymore, but tried to control the yang spirit in the life palace. I had to say that this method of refining the blood essence was really extraordinary. I could clearly feel that my understanding of the yang spirit had deepened a lot. It could understand my thoughts, and it was no longer unfamiliar with it. In this way, I was fully prepared for the transformation of the Tao Qi. I was overjoyed and didn't delay any longer. I immediately used the transformation of the Tao Qi. I used the yang spirit in the life palace to condense the Tao Qi into a solid form and pushed it out of my body. After a while, a light yellow ball appeared in my hands. At the same time, I felt a sense of separation from my body, but I didn't care too much about it and directly threw it out of the cave. In the blink of an eye, I heard a loud bang, and the whole cave shook. When I looked carefully, I found that the barrier I'd set at the entrance of the cave had been broken. Seeing this, I was quite happy. This technique was really powerful. With just a simple blow, it could disintegrate the barrier set by the Yang God Celestial Master. At the moment, I had just learned it and couldn't fully display its power. If I could master it, I might be able to fight against the Yang God Celestial Master. Thinking of this, I didn't care about my body's exhaustion. I held the jade bracelet tightly and kept absorbing the true dragon Qi to restore my strength. After about a few months, I was quite proficient in the transformation of the Tao Qi. However, due to my low cultivation, I still couldn't use its full power. Even so, if I met a Yang God Celestial Master in the future, I would have a way to save my life. I had originally planned to continue cultivating here, but after counting the days, the half-year period between me and Tao Wu seemed to be approaching. Thinking of this, I had to put it aside for now. After all, meeting Tao Wu was the most important thing. As such, I didn't linger in the cave any longer and walked out. As soon as I came out of the cave, I saw that the bottom of the mountain was in a mess and the ground was full of holes. Seeing this, I was a little suspicious. Could it be that there was a fight in the Medicine King Valley? However, in the blink of an eye, I realized that the scene before me was the work of the transformation of Taoist Qi. Fortunately, I chose this remote place. If I stayed in the village, with the power of the Qi transformation technique, I'm afraid the entire village would be uprooted. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but grin. I happily flew towards the village. From afar, I could actually feel Uncle Lin's aura. It seemed that I had been gone for quite some time. The fatty had already brought Uncle Lin over. This meant that he and Bai Ling's wedding was near. As I thought about this, I became excited and sped up, heading toward the village. After a few seconds, I landed steadily on the ground. At this time, the people of the Medicine King Valley were busy cleaning up some dried herbs. When they saw me return, they immediately stopped what they were doing and saluted me. I waved my hand, signaling them not to be too polite. Then, I ignored them and followed Uncle Lin's aura. When I found Uncle Lin, he was chatting with Fatty and Bai Ling. When they saw me, they all looked happy and gestured for me to take a seat. My sudden arrival interrupted their conversation, so they didn't mention it again. Instead, it became a time for me and Uncle Lin to reminisce. Although he was the successor of the Nine Cauldrons clan, he was essentially my elder. Moreover, I carried the hopes of the Nine Cauldrons clan. When he looked at me, his eyes were filled with gratitude. However, after chatting for a while, he didn't ask any more questions. Instead, it was the fatty who took over the conversation. He mentioned that he had suddenly heard an earth-shattering sound from the cave and had gone to check it out. Unexpectedly, condensed Taoist Qi flew out from the cave from time to time, smashing into the ground and causing it to sink. He was rather curious, but he didn't dare to go in and disturb me. He could only stand outside and watch for a while before leaving. Seeing that I had returned, he thought of this matter again and asked me what cultivation technique I had learned. This cultivation technique was recorded in the death scripture and was rather mysterious. However, since everyone in front of me was my own people, I didn't have to deliberately hide it. Thinking about this, I told the fatty about it, but I didn't mention the death scripture. After listening to me, he suddenly realized that my cultivation speed was truly astonishing. I was afraid that he wouldn't be able to catch up to me. I knew that the fatty was just joking, so I didn't take it to heart. Instead, I teased him a bit and asked if he had something good to do. When he heard this, he couldn't restrain the joy on his face. He nodded repeatedly and told me that he had indeed planned to do so, and that he had been discussing it just now. As he spoke, the usually stern Uncle Lin also smiled. However, after a moment, he stood up and motioned for me to go out. I knew that he had many questions to ask me, so I followed him out. After a few steps, Uncle Lin went straight to the point and asked me if I knew anything about the mountain and sea realm. Seeing that he was asking, I didn't hide anything. I told him that I had already learned about it from Nangong. After listening to me, he nodded slightly and didn't say anything. However, when he mentioned the mountain and sea realm, I thought of something. Earlier, Nangong had told me that he was the one who planned to open the mountain and sea realm. However, although the 9 Cauldron clans had the same goal as Nangong, they didn't have much of a connection other than the fact that they were both shamans. Why would something like this happen? After thinking about it for a while, I had a guess. Perhaps the 9 Cauldron clans were arranged by Emperor Ku. However, that didn't seem logical. Emperor Ku was a descendant of the Yellow Emperor, not shaman. Even if Nangong's plans were all within his grasp, he still couldn't mobilize the shamans to do things for him. With that in mind, I asked Uncle Lin, who arranged the 9 Cauldron clans. Naturally, he knew what I meant. He turned around and looked at me for a long time, not saying anything. After a while, he sighed and told me that the ancestor hadn't mentioned this matter. However, he had indeed discovered some clues over the years, but those clues weren't enough to make a deduction. In that case, the 9 Cauldron clans had been arranged by someone. However, I was very curious as to what clues he had discovered. Uncle Lin seemed to know what I was thinking. He told me that this matter might be related to the ancient war. However, he didn't say anything else. His words startled me. I had never thought about the ancient war. However, now that I heard him talk about it, I couldn't find any connection. Although I was curious and wanted to ask Uncle Lin, it seemed that he didn't want to talk to me. I could only keep my curiosity to myself. However, after hearing him mention the ancient war, I thought of someone. Back in Chiyo's tomb, I had the 4 words natural-born saint. In another place, we had used the 9 cauldrons to enter Chiyo's tomb. In that case, the 9 Cauldron clans were related to the sacrificial evil spirit. If there was anyone who could explain this in detail, it would have to be the sacrificial evil spirit. With that in mind, I didn't continue asking Uncle Lin. I planned to ask him the next time I saw the sacrificial evil spirit. When Uncle Lin saw that I didn't reply for a long time, he looked up at the farmer god cauldron in the sky. Then, he softly said to me, "You can't stay here any longer. You have to quickly increase your strength. I feel that the mountain and sea realm will open soon." I understood what he meant. However, with my current cultivation base as a young god celestial master, was it still not enough to open the mountain and sea realm? Hearing my question, Uncle Lin shook his head. That's not the case. It's just that after the mountain and sea realm opens, there will be many things waiting for you to do. I'm afraid you won't have much time to continue cultivating. Although Uncle Lin's words were vague, I could guess what he meant. Perhaps he was referring to the chaos of the demon race after the mountain and sea realm opened. In that case, it made sense for him to be so anxious. Right now, I had enough time to increase my cultivation base. However, there was no Tai Sui in the Medicine King's Valley. Staying here would be a waste of time. However, the only Tai Sui I knew of was Xiao Jin. He had long since disappeared, so it would be difficult to find him. After thinking about it over and over again, I finally had a goal. I planned to go to Wangwu Paradise. Back in Wang Can's father's mansion, I had seen a strange spell formation that could transform true dragon chi into shaman chi. Moreover, there were 4 true dragon veins in Wangwu Paradise, which would be of great help to increase my strength. Since I had made up my mind, I didn't think too much about it. I told Uncle Lin my plan. However, I also mentioned that I wanted to attend to Fatty's wedding before leaving. Unexpectedly, after hearing my plan, he shook his head and said, "You have a heavy responsibility on your shoulders. This is a critical moment, so you can't waste time. You also know that many times we don't have a choice. I think Xiao will understand you." At this time, Uncle Lin's tone was that of an elder, as if he was trying to persuade me. I knew that they had high hopes for me, and I couldn't let them down. As such, I didn't insist. I planned to have a few words with the fatty, then leave. Uncle Lin didn't object to this. After a while, I found a fatty and the young man and told them that I would be leaving the Medicine King's Valley immediately. After hearing my words, the two of them were surprised and asked, why? I glanced at the fatty. I didn't know if I should tell him the secret. After thinking about it for a while, I told him that the 6-month period between me and Lao AI was up, so I needed to go back immediately. Bai Ling seemed to have noticed my actions, and her eyes were filled with thoughts. Perhaps she had also learned about the mountain and sea realm from Nangong, so she didn't try to persuade me to stay. Although the fatty still felt a little regretful, he didn't say anything else. He just asked me to come back as soon as possible to attend his wedding. Of course, I wouldn't refuse his request, so I agreed. After saying goodbye to the two of them, I went to Wu Yu's room and told him that I would be leaving soon. I also told them to stay here. After hearing my words, the two of them had some doubts. However, they also knew that they couldn't help me in any way, so they nodded and told me to take care of myself. Chapter 845. After leaving the Medicine King Valley, I didn't go straight to Wangwu Grotto Heaven. Instead, I decided to go back to the Fire God Temple. Why I had told Fatty wasn't a lie. There were only a few days left until the half-year deadline, so I had to go see Baian first before going to Wangwu Grotto Heaven to cultivate. After learning about Baian's true identity from Nangong, there were still many things he didn't want to tell me. Perhaps I could get some information from Baian during this trip to the Fire God Temple. After leaving the Medicine King Mountain, I went straight to the airport. I had nothing to do on the plane, so I just lay there, familiarizing myself with the transformation of Taoist Qi into form and thinking about what Uncle Lin had told me. Nangong, Baian, Uncle Lin, and all of them had been giving me all sorts of information and guiding me along the way. They had been my guides ever since I'd stepped onto the path of cultivation. Therefore, Uncle Lin's serious warning wasn't just because he was worried. It was more likely that he knew something was about to happen, but couldn't say it out loud. He could only use this method to warn me. Therefore, I didn't dare to neglect Uncle Lin's words. That was also why I didn't hesitate to agree. Thinking about this, I sighed inwardly. In fact, there was no need for Uncle Lin to tell me all this. I'd already felt a strong sense of crisis. Over the years of cultivation, I hadn't just increased my cultivation base, but also my knowledge. I'd long since learned a lot about the cultivation world. But recently, a lot of things have happened that have completely exceeded my understanding. Ignoring everything else, just the appearance of the 10 great divine items was something the cultivation world hadn't seen in thousands of years. All of this was to prepare for the opening of the mountain and sea realm gate. Just the process of preparing for the mountain and sea realm was shocking enough. Once the gate of the mountain and sea realm opens, I can't help but wonder what sort of shocking events will unfold. In the face of such a huge change, others might be able to escape and hide temporarily to avoid trouble, but I can't hide at all. Therefore, Uncle Lin's words are very reasonable. In the face of these things, the only person I can rely on is myself. Only by increasing my cultivation will I be able to protect myself in such a situation. Of course, I didn't just need to protect myself. There was also Baian the Fatty, Nangong, the Witch Tribe, Wangwu Grotto Heaven, and so on. There were countless people and things I couldn't let go of. Therefore, this requires me to have greater strength. While thinking about these things, the plane landed and arrived at Shenanjia. I was already familiar with the road from Shenanjia to the Fire God Temple. Not long after, I arrived in front of the Fire God Temple. It was just that, unlike the joy and anticipation I felt in the past, this time I felt a little apprehensive. Previously at the Medicine King Valley, I already knew that Tao Wu was killed by Monster God Ling, and I was the reincarnation of Monster God Ling. To a certain extent, I was Monster God Ling. After knowing this, I felt a bit of guilt. I didn't know how to face him. I stood in front of the Fire God Temple and hesitated for a long time. Finally, I sighed and walked in. I am the reincarnation of the demon god Feng, but ultimately, I am not the real demon god Feng. I am Zhou Yi, the husband of Swan and I. Moreover, Lao AI had long known about my background and had never expressed any dissatisfaction, so she didn't mind. It seemed that there was no need for me to take it to heart. After entering the fire god temple, I still didn't find any signs of the contract, but I didn't mind it. He's been around for thousands of years, and naturally he has his own goals. Now that the mountain and sea realm is about to open, he should be just like me, busy accumulating his resources. Therefore, there's no need for him to come see me. As I walked, I quickly arrived at the inner room where Bayan and I were staying. There were still a few days before we would meet, so Bayan was naturally not here. I was not in a hurry and just sat cross-legged on the bed, continuing to cultivate the transformation of Dao Qi while waiting for Bayan to appear. Just like that, a night passed. On the morning of the second day, a strange noise came from Xiang Lu's pouch. I took out the sound, transmitting talisman. It was Han Wenan. Han Wenan, he should still be accompanying Yi Pianpian in the Penglai deity region. Why would he send a message now? Did something happen to Yi Pianpian? Filled with doubts, I quickly opened the sound, transmitting talisman, and found that there were only a few words in the message. Han Wenan only said that he was looking for me and asked where I was. He didn't say anything specific. Han Wenan had always been a reliable person. If there wasn't anything urgent, he wouldn't easily send me a message. Also, I remembered that sound transmitting talismans couldn't be used in the Penglai deity region, so he must have come out from there. I had originally planned to ask Han Wenan about the specifics. After all, it wasn't convenient to tell him where I was. But after thinking about it, Han Wenan definitely had his reasons for not directly telling me. I didn't ask, but instead wrote back and told him that my current location was a bit hidden, so it wasn't convenient to find me. I asked him to tell me where he was, and I would go look for him. There were still a few days before we would meet, so I should still be able to make it if I want to see Han Wenan. Not long after I sent the message, Han Wenan sent me his location. He also urged me to hurry over and be careful on the way. He deliberately added this, which made me curious. Could it be that someone wanted to harm him? Or was I being watched? If that was the case, he must be in a very dangerous situation. Thinking about this, I didn't dare to delay any longer. I immediately left the Fire God Temple and rushed to Han Wenan's location. Even if I didn't delay my journey, it was already evening when I arrived at Han Wenan's hotel. After I knocked on the door, Han Wenan seemed to have sensed my aura. He immediately opened the door and welcomed me in. When I entered the room, he immediately asked me if anyone was following me. I was a little surprised, but I still lowered my head and pondered for a while. Then, I nodded to confirm that I wasn't being followed. Of course, this was just my intuition. If someone with a high cultivation base was secretly following me, it was normal that I couldn't detect him. Seeing that I was sure, he heaved a sigh of relief and invited me to sit down. After I sat down, I hurriedly asked him what was so important that he had to be in such a hurry. As I asked, he was straightforward and told me the reason. Just as I had expected, Han Wenan had just returned from the Penglai deity region. He had originally planned to stay in the Penglai deity region for a while. After all, the spiritual energy there was abundant and suitable for cultivation. Moreover, after the previous incident, the Penglai deity region's lord didn't drive him out. On the contrary, he invited him to play chess with him several times to relieve his boredom. In this way, the Penglai deity region tacitly allowed Han Wenan to stay in the deity region for a long time. However, just yesterday, quite a few people came to the originally empty celestial realm. These people were very strong, and Han Wenan couldn't see through their cultivation. Some of them had the demeanor of an immortal. He guessed that their strength should be on par with the Penglai deity region's lord. After listening to this, I began to ponder. Previously, I thought that the Penglai deity region was an immortal Xiaju who had ascended. However, after learning about the existence of Kunlun from Shang-Chi, I rejected this idea. Shang-Chi once said that Kunlun was the real deity region. The immortal realm that Xiaju had ascended wasn't something I could detect, but I could infer some things. Last time, the snake spirit and I were outside the Kunlun stone tablet, and the snake spirit even entered the stone tablet. However, no one appeared. From this, I could roughly infer that there was no one in Kunlun. Even if there was someone, they shouldn't be interested in me and the snake spirit, so they avoided us. This was completely different from the Penglai deity region. Previously, when he appeared in the Penglai deity region, he didn't say much to us, but it wasn't unintentional. At his cultivation level, he had already cultivated for many years. No matter what he did, he had a purpose. Based on this, the Penglai deity region might not have ascended to the immortal realm. Of course, even if he hadn't reached the immortal realm, I felt that he had at least reached the peak of Xiaju, or even close to Xiaju. As for Han Wen'an, he had just mentioned that among the people who went to the Penglai deity region, there were a few whose cultivation levels were on par with the old man. According to my speculation, it was very likely that President Li and Celestial Master Zhang of Longhu Mountain, whom I had never seen before, were among them. Thinking of this, I asked Han Wen'an to confirm this. However, he shook his head and told me that he had never seen President Li and Celestial Master Zhang of Longhu Mountain, so he wasn't sure if they were among the people. However, there were indeed many Taoist priests in the crowd, and a few of them seemed to be members of the Metaphysics Association. In this case, my speculation wasn't wrong. Even if they weren't the President and Celestial Master Zhang, these people were hidden masters from the two factions. I didn't know why the two factions had gathered in the Penglai deity region. Just as I was about to ask, Han Wen'an took the initiative to tell me. He told me that among the people who went to the Penglai deity region, there were not only the two factions, but also people from the Buddhist faction. When he first saw the situation, he felt that it was a little strange. He thought that these people gathered together to discuss something important, and this matter was likely to affect all the cultivators in the world. Although he was curious, Han Wen'an naturally didn't have the right to approach when they were discussing, so he couldn't know the specific content. However, later, Yi Pianpian found him and told him to leave the Penglai deity region immediately and come out to find me. She also told me not to reveal any traces for the time being, as the three factions would send people to find me. Hearing this, I frowned slightly and hurriedly asked Han Wen'an if Yi Pianpian told him why the three factions were looking for me. He nodded. I was just about to talk about this. After Yi Pianpian entrusted this matter to me, she told me that those people had been talking about the key and occasionally mentioned you. They said that they were looking for you. Yi Pianpian guessed that they were looking for you because of this. Now that he said this, I understood. The matter of the key was none other than Yi Pianpian, Yi Paolon, and the woman from the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum. Yi Pianpian and Yi Paolon naturally didn't have much to do with me. Now that the three factions were looking for me, it was most likely because they believed that the last key was in my hands. In that case, they also knew that the mountain and sea realm was about to open. Presumably, Yi Pianpian was afraid that these people would cause trouble for me, so she sent Han Wen'an down to inform me. This kind of friendship moved me. However, I didn't know if Yi Pianpian knew that she was also one of the three keys. It seemed that old President Li had taken her as a disciple because of the matter of the mountain and sea realm. Old President Li really was a schemer. Unfortunately, when a mountain and sea realm opened, he would find that the world of immortals he had been looking forward to didn't exist. In my opinion, the idea of living forever was just a pipe dream. Having reached this point in his train of thought, I couldn't help but laugh coldly. Of course, Han Wen'an noticed my expression and frowned. He asked me why I had such an expression and if I knew something. He was quite quick-witted and was able to tell a glance. Of course, I knew what old President Li and the others were plotting. However, it was clear that Han Wen'an didn't know anything about it. Considering his question, I wasn't sure if I should tell him about it. After thinking it over, I decided to keep it a secret from him. He had the Nuwa stone in his body, which was one of the 10 great divine items, and was also going to be used to open the mountain and sea realm. When the time came, someone would tell him the details, and I wouldn't need to say anything. However, when it came to the Nuwa stone, I suddenly felt worried for Han Wen'an. Back in the heavenly grand ritual of Wangwu Grotto, he told me that he had fallen unconscious after jumping into the pit in the Yinshang royal tomb. When he woke up, he found that the position of his heart had changed. At first, I didn't know what it was. It wasn't until I came into contact with some divine items that I learned that it was the Nuwa stone. The Nuwa stone had been left over from Nuwa's mending of the heavens. According to the legends, Nuwa, in order to save her beloved daughter, had poured 10,000 years of her cultivation base into a piece of multicolored jade left over from her mending of the heavens. From then on, the spirit stone had gained special powers. According to the ancient records, the Nuwa stone had the power to regenerate heaven and earth and to resurrect people. In other words, Han Wen had relied on this power to be reborn. Since opening the mountain and sea realm required the cooperation of the 10 great divine items, then the Nuwa stone in Han Wen's body would be put to good use. Although I didn't know if I needed to take the Nuwa stone out of his body to use, if I did, then Han Wen might die again. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.